What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto found out he was never human, but something far greater? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The tiny humans scattered when she stomped a paw down on their pathetic formation and roared. Her tail swatted them off her back and she let out a yip of excitement. The pitiful humans were no match for her now that she was free. Even the small one sitting on top of the samurai toad would fall before. Wait a minute. The Kyuubi paused, 1 foot raised above a quivering band of shinobi. This situation seems strangely familiar. She took a step forward over the fleeing ninja, bringing her face closer to the little yellow-headed figure on top of the orange amphibian. She stopped just shy of the brandished blade. It was large enough that it had the potential to hurt her, especially if she was fool enough to run her face right into it. The human was waving its arms about in a manner that made the Kyuubi feel fear in the pit of her stomach, an emotion that she shouldn't have felt ever, much less recently, but it seemed almost like an old friend. Or perhaps more accurately, like a smell that couldn't quite get purged from the den, no matter how many human corpses one found stuck in odd crevices and threw out. As a great rush of water swept over her, followed by an agonizing burst of electricity, she contemplated why she felt relieved giant arms weren't reaching for her. Though, why was she killing all these humans, anyway? She was finally free and she attacked random mites? Sure, it was cathartic, but something was nagging at her. Something that seemed quite important. She peered at the human again. His hair felt like it was the right color, but it was too long, and he wasn't cursing her at the top of his lungs. Somehow this was the last straw. Something was very wrong. She turned delicately on her paws, putting her nose to the mysterious force that was trying to push her forward. There was danger in that little yellow-headed human. She could feel it in her bones, and it was trouble that she didn't want to deal with again. Again? When had she seen that human before? Since when could she recognize humans at all? No matter. Someone had dared to call her to this world, and try to bind her to their will. She could sense them in her mind, could feel the way that the world had turned to black, red and white and the need to do the other's bidding. She felt her anger rising, images of humans with red eyes, a color which she normally approved, lashing across her vision and making her snarl. She had to bring them back where? No, she had to kill them all. Yes, though maybe they were all gone? At least one remained, however. Only they knew how to control her majestic self. But the days where she would put up with such nonsense were long over. This demon had never let herself be subject to the whims of gods, much less some puny humans. She was going to live by her own will. Believe it, Minato had just had the fright of his life. The Konoha police had been tasked with keeping the gigantic demon fox distracted, but for some reason the beast had suddenly started to ignore them and came right at the Hokage and his summons. He had had to break off the long and complicated set of seals of the modified Shiki Fujin in order to prepare a counterattack. But the beast had just looked at him, the elemental jutsu having no visible effect. Its tails no longer lashing except for the occasional, almost confused-looking flick. The nose, as long as the Hokage tower, was tall, scrunched up a bit, and Minato was pretty sure it wasn't because of the 50-foot blade in its face. The demon seemed as completely unconcerned about the boss toad's weapons as T had about the S-rank jutsus to the face. The demon seemed distracted by something only it could sense. And then the damn thing had just run off. Hokage-sama, you saved us. The cheer went up from the shinobi as Minato looked in disbelief at the retreating tails of the fox demon. As he released the energy for the sealing technique, a disturbing sigh of disappointment shuddered though his soul as white fingers released his heart. Minato wasn't quite sure what to say. It had been a very different encounter than the one that he had been imagining. Namely, he was still alive. He was definitely not sure how he felt about that. It was almost certainly a good thing, but he felt incongruously annoyed to have built up all that angst and have it end so anticlimactically. He shook his head and barked to the nearest Junin, "Follow the beast at a safe distance, if you can keep up with it. Make sure it isn't doubling back." "Yes, sir," came the reply before the Anbu squad streaked off to follow the beast. "The rest of you, bring the wounded to the hospital." "Yes, Hokage-sama." As the ninja of his village scurried about in a much more cheerful way than they had been a few minutes ago, Minato sank to his knees on top of Gamabunta's head. Was that normal demon behavior? He asked his summons, bemused. No. came the gruff voice of the Toad Boss. Not at all. I'm not hallucinating in the belly of the Death God, right? The nine-tailed demon fox, who can crush mountains or cause tsunamis by simply existing, stopped mid-havoc, gave me a sniff, and ran off. That is what happened, Gamabunta confirmed. Minato pulled his shirt away from his chest and smelled himself experimentally. He didn't smell marvelous, considering he had been sweating at the idea of voluntarily sending himself to hell, but he didn't smell that bad. He turned when he felt a familiar chakra signal land next to him. You're still alive, Sarutobi said in ecstatic disbelief. Did the Death God not require? I didn't seal the Kyuubi. Minato cut him off. What? Sarutobi asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. But, he looked around at the battered villagers and the wounded they were carrying. The scenery was distinctly demon-free. Minato stood up and brushed off his robes. I didn't say it made any sense. He replied, somewhat put out, but just starting to feel the first glimmers of exhilaration. Until he realized that now that he was going to live, he was going to have to do all that paperwork he had been neglecting as he researched the seal that was supposed to kill him. Ooh, the kitsune could feel the pressure building. It was pressing all the colors out of the world except for tones of red. She snarled and skidded to a halt. The pressure was coming from below, so she dug furiously at the earth until a tiny mite burst from the wreckage. The Kyuubi spun to track the flash of human with a snarl, trying to smash it under her paws, but it was too quick. Suddenly the human's eyes seemed to expand, seemed to take over the entirety of what she could see. Spinning black pinwheels sucked her in. No, this she remembered, this was how she had been trapped so long ago. Or, for so long. Or, didn't it not work on her anymore? She was so confused that she was almost fully caught in the technique before she came back to herself. Not again, never again. What was the trick? Possession. That's right, she had been behind a seal, in the sewers, somehow. But she wasn't possessing anyone anymore. Had she possessed someone? She must have, but the only person available now was the little gnat trying to subdue her. Fine, two could play these mind games. She would show the pitiful speck the danger of messing with a fucking force of nature. Instead of pulling back from the technique, she rushed forward, pouring herself into the human through his navel as he broke the gaze lock between them in horror. The kitsune yipped excitedly as she flew into the human body, compressing her chakra in a way that felt somewhat restrictive, but right and familiar at the same time. The familiar paths were before her, but she knew that she had to twist them. Yes, there were the doors, but this time she would be on the outside and the fool human could stay and rot. She felt the seal settle with a distinct thunk and she gazed happily at the human gaping at her from behind massive barred doors. What have you done? The human asked, his eyes whirling almost too fast to separate the black from the red, but it no longer had any effect on her at all. The human could not even suppress her chakra from inside the seal. Ah, the human doesn't understand. What an unusual situation, she said sarcastically. She spun on a paw and skipped happily up out of the dungeons, ignoring the human's cries. She opened her eyes and saw white puffy clouds sailing across a blue sky. One looked a bit like a rabbit. Rabbit. Her stomach growled appreciatively. The kitsune sat up and saw the trunk of a tree. The trunk? Say what? She followed the trunk up to the canopy and saw the light filtering through the branches. Rather pretty, but shouldn't she be seeing the canopy from above? She rolled over onto all fours and felt distinctly awkward. Ah, she had forgotten the less enjoyable reality of possession. True, no more being controlled by red spinning-eyed human annoyances, a problem she felt had some terms associated with it. Anyway, no slavery, but it meant you had to be a human. Bipedal. With a grimace the Kyuubi stood on two legs, shakily finding her balance and looking down at her clothes. Bletch. Another annoying human necessity. Still, some clothes were more tolerable than others. The red armor was okay, but this blue? Absolutely unacceptable, and there were so many layers. She pulled all the constricting fabric off and set about examining her body. It was all right, she supposed. It seemed more toned and fit than she was used to. Though what she was comparing it to, she wasn't entirely sure. But there was this dangly thing that seemed completely impractical, and she felt it had some sort of significance. Oh hells no, she wasn't going to get stuck in a male body again. Again? Well, ever. The Kitsune no Kyuubi had enough problems with the other demons thinking she was male due to her booming, deep voice. Could she help that her chest was the size of a small mountain? No. You'd think they would know to use their noses, not their eyes, but sometimes demons could be as thick as humans. She'd had to crack more than a few of their skulls open so the concept could get past the thick bone. Well, this simply wouldn't do. Fortunately, it seemed pretty easy to shift the bits around as she saw fit. For some reason her chakra flowed familiarly along the body, molding it to be that of a human female. It almost felt like she was healing a hole ripped in her chest. Though the male condition wasn't painful or an injury, per se, the switch had the same degree of satisfaction. The kitsune looked down at her chest. She now had two impractical dangling things. Honestly, had humans so lost touch with nature that they couldn't even manage to lactate properly? With a put-upon sigh, the kitsune tore off a strip of the offensive blue material and tied the mammary tissue into place. As annoying as clothing was, she supposed humans didn't really have a choice in the matter, considering their unfortunate biology. She pulled the lower half of the blue garment back on, wincing at the color and vowing to get something red, or possibly black, or maybe orange. Orange would be nice. Yes, she vowed to steal something more suitable at the first opportunity. The red armor seemed to be all in one piece, and she didn't have the faintest idea of how to modify it. Considering it was the only thing reasonably acceptable, she pulled it on, even though now it fit very strangely due to her changed figure. She tried walking and felt like her steps were strangely dulled. She tore off the hard things strapped to her feet and flexed her toes in the dirt appreciatively. Much better. This would have to do for now. The kitsune shrugged and leapt off over the trees. It was pleasing to be above them again, even if she ended up crashing back through the boughs before she got the hang of landing on the branches instead of shattering through them. Oh, back at the dug-up crater that used to be a secret underground base, the Anbu team was bent over, holding their knees and panting heavily. I don't know where the Kyuubi went from here, but the trail of destruction pretty much ends at this spot. The one with the tiger mask said when he was finally recovered enough to speak. The whole team had had to run full out for the better part of 4 hours, and still had arrived what looked like over 3 hours after the Kyuubi. The damn demon was fast. Whoever was here, they certainly got an unpleasant surprise, muttered the crane, kicking over a piece of metal that might have once been a door. Maybe it went back to the demon realm, after it tore something up. The puma shrugged. Don't be ridiculous. The crane scoffed. Well, stranger things have happened, like it showing up in the first place. The puma retorted. From the looks of this, though, someone might have been summoning it. The tiger said, making a sweeping arm gesture to encompass the scene of destruction. As he was finishing the motion, something fluttering caught his eye. In a flash, fatigue mostly forgotten, he was over to the scrap of cloth, lifting it up. It was a navy blue yukata, with a symbol on the back. The Anbu dropped it as if it had burned him. Was that the Uchiha clan symbol? The crane asked uneasily. We'd better report this to the Hokage. The tiger replied grimly, picking up the cloth and bundling it up under his gray armor. The Kyuubi was pleased, or at least as pleased as she ever could get with things being as they were. Being trapped was no fun, but at least she could change things a bit. The humans thought that if she were bound and the pitiful human shell died, she would as well, but she knew better. She was an elemental force, not some being constrained to life or death. When the humans had tried this nonsense before, and it had only been a matter of time before she was back terrorizing their pitiful, this binding was different. She was an elemental force, true. However, the human had woven the seal well, so in order that the laws of nature would not be violated, time twisted around on itself and made a loop. She didn't die, her soul was not taken by the death god, but neither was she free. At first she had just napped and left the brat to his own devices, but after the baby was killed and interrupted her sleep with resets an uncountable number of times, she'd had enough. There was a certain level of uselessness she expected from humans, but the brat was pathetically weak and helpless. It was boring and disgusting watching the humans commit infanticide over and over. And not even creatively. This time around, though, she had managed to keep the stupid idiot from dying in all the infinite ways he managed to get himself killed before. Still trapped, life sucked. But at least it was different. It wasn't the most interesting iteration of the brat's personality, but he was still alive after nearly 6 centuries. Changes that she now noticed and paid intense attention to, as she had nothing else to do. Still a blink of the eye for her, but the world had gone through some interesting changes. And so, she was relatively pleased. In order to get the brat to this age, she'd had to learn the intimate details of running his body. It was actually kind of amusing, especially when there was a battle and his lungs were ripped out, he lost a limb, or something equally catastrophic. Though nothing that interesting had happened for over a century, sadly. Occasionally she would change the bodies of people he was close to for extended periods of time as a fun hobby, though again, there hadn't been much of that lately. Probably for the best. She already knew more about the brat's various wives and lovers than she would have been able to stomach or really even want to think about knowing prior to being trapped in this hell. Suddenly the brat was choking. The Kyuubi told the tubes in his chest to relax and secrete and try to get the muscles to move properly to expel the pretzel? Oh, honestly, the kitsune wasn't too worried until she noticed that the pretzel wasn't moving fast enough. And the rest of the brat's body was starting to unravel as she was forced to divide her attention. "Brat, let me out. No way, you damn fox. You're not going to trick me that easily." The kitsune started to feel desperate as the brat's body started to literally disintegrate around them. "This isn't a trick, you idiot. Do you want to die?" "Yes," came the soft reply, filled with such longing that were the kitsune human she would have been moved to tears. "What?" she said shortly, getting so angry she couldn't help bashing against the cage. Released from this torment, finally. The brat's mind started to fade as his body completely shut down and began to fray at the distant edges. His fingers were turning white, then black, then to ash. "No, let me fix this. No." The Kyuubi howled in despair as the brat died finally. She didn't remember why, but when it started again she was vicious in tearing up the pitiful village that she had lived in for so long, saved from untold natural disasters and wars, seen grow into a technological powerhouse. The death god's arms reached out to her. The kitsune shot upright, panting and looking around wildly. She grabbed her head and then looked at her hand in confusion. Hand, but not a man's hand. She thought back. She had been leaping over the forest, ignoring the intense pain that was shooting through her head and the way her eyes were blurring. And then nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. She had remembered something. She plopped down and let out a yipping laugh. She had passed out and had a dream, but a dream of her past life. She shot bolt upright again and started running gushes of chakra through her body in a way that she now knew why she was so skilled at. It was amazing. She could use her entire self to flow about the puny human form, could slip into all the crevices. Nothing was holding her back this time. She viciously tore through the little tiny water bags and shifted them so that they were no longer disintegrating even as they were born. Changing them also got rid of the lingering fatigue. "Why am I so worried about this human bug body, anyway?" she scoffed, and then twitched as her voice echoed against the little hairs in watery tubes in her ears and ricocheted around the curve of hardened bone of her skull. She started walking slowly, looking up at the trees and watching the light filter between the leaves. "Well," she mused, "they can't control me in this form. Perhaps once I hunt all the ones with red eyes down, and kill the one that sits on the toad, maybe then I will be free." With that she felt a grin stretch wide across her face. The rush of little oily things in her blood felt good, so she increased them. She fell over drooling and then started cackling. Minato stared down at the Uchiha clan symbol on the torn piece of cloth. On the outside he was calm, collected, and professional. On the inside his mind was stuck on a loop of expletives. He absently bounced his newborn son Naruto on his knee as his dry, red-rimmed eyes slowly lost focus. Even as disastrous as this was, he seized on the Oppo-R unity to deal with something other than his wife's death. The only Uchiha that was unaccounted for was the, until recently, presumed dead Uchiha Madara. Incidentally the only one known to be able to control the Kyuubi. "Thank you, Anbu. You are dismissed," the Hokage said, looking at the smooth porcelain masks with his own in place. "Yes, Hokage-sama." They bowed and left. Minato closed his eyes and gulped when Naruto let out a happy chortle that sounded too much like his mother. His late mother. Minato shook his head to clear his thoughts. He needed to focus on the problem at hand. It seemed that if Madara had been controlling the fox, but it also seemed that his control was not as absolute as it had once been. Maybe the bastard had even been killed by the demon. But it was dangerous to really believe that. Minato needed to either prove that this shirt was from another Uchiha, or go on high alert for Madara. He wasn't sure which would be the better outcome, that he had one Hokage-level traitor out there somewhere who could summon the most powerful of the Biju, or that he had two traitorous Uchiha on his hands. Oh, the kitsune was lost. She was also extremely hungry. This was not something that usually would concern her, but she didn't want to pass out again. And unless she wanted to run the body entirely on chakra, which could probably work for a while until the body disintegrated, then she needed the body to take care of some of the repairs on its own. She came down from her leap onto the nest of some sort of bird. The kitsune grinned and snatched it before it could register anything more than shock and popped off its head. She sucked the blood out of it and grimaced. It tasted much better when one was a giant manifestation of hate. She peeled the skin off and chewed through the meat. Then she poked some holes through the egg's shells and sucked out the insides. She let out a sigh of happiness when her stomach stopped yelling at her. Now if only the human bug trapped behind the seal would shut up as well. She jumped up over the trees again and used chakra to make one stride as a human equal her natural bodies. She cackled gleefully as she felt the weightlessness and the human's visceral fear at being up this high. At the peak of her jump she could see a cluster of buildings in the distance. Perhaps the humans would be able to tell her which direction the Leaf Village was. She landed in the center of the village on feet glowing red with chakra to absorb the impact, her toes spread into the dirt. She looked up to see the humans staring at her with wide eyes and open mouths. She frowned and over half of them passed out. "Demon!" shrieked one, before the whole bunch of humans turned into a screaming, noisy mess. The kitsune could feel her eyebrows starting to twitch without her conscious control. "Excuse me, I was trying to find the leaf." The humans were stumbling over each other in their attempts to escape her. She flashed over to the nearest one and grabbed it by the back of the neck. "I was talking to you, pathetic mortal. You should be thrilled that I am taking the time to do so." The human suddenly smelled even worse. The kitsune's hand spasmed shut in disgust, crushing the pathetic thing's neck. She dropped the thing soaked in its own urine, and now blood. With a sigh the kitsune dusted her hands off on her pants. She looked around at the toppled bodies. All she'd done was look at them, by the kami. With bored disinterest, until a flash of color caught her eye. Chittering in excitement she went over to the human who was wearing a bright orange shirt. A female human, no less. She quickly ripped off the blue and red nonsense that she had been wearing and gently maneuvered the shirt off of the female. The kitsune cocked her head to the side when she saw that the human was wearing something else underneath the shirt. It was an acceptable pink color, but what was the purpose? Her hands deftly moved through the motions required to remove it, and flashes of naked human flesh secreting fluid and flushed with blood just under the skin flickered at the edges of her thoughts. At first she thought it was from her memories, but she quickly found it was her prisoner. She sneered and altered the seal in her belly to bar him from any control whatsoever. Sadly, she still didn't know how to shut him up. With a shrug she pulled the lacy thing on around her chest, securing it with some small amount of trouble as the angle was different than she was used to. Or was used to observing, whatever. But it was significantly more comfortable than the blue cloth squashing everything flat to her chest. Over that she slipped the orange shirt. The girl's pants were a green-blue, though, and unacceptable. Another human supplied black pants with red stripes down the sides, and a third some wraps in a peach color. The kitsune crooned her approval as she wrapped the peach wraps over her legs and secured it in place. This should stop the annoying flapping the pants did around her legs. Most of the humans were wearing things strapped to their feet and she scoffed at their weakness. How were they able to properly balance in those things? She took off again, leaping several miles away and delighting in how the wind whipped through her new attire. The Hokage was not amused. The former Hokage looked like he could barely keep his perverted thoughts to himself. Minato gave Sarutobi a warning glare. He should at least try to restrain himself when he was cradling a newborn before turning back to the Junin and his 3 genins. So let me get this straight. You went out on the urgent medical call to Pulcho and found that the village was claiming a woman fell from the sky. A demonic woman. Nanori, one of the genin interrupted. I think they said a succubus. Kun, another of the genin interrupted. Regardless that a female of some persuasion fell from the sky, choked one of them to death. We were able to save the man's life, Hokage-sama. Though he will always have a rasp to his voice. Yumhun, the Junin and medical genius corrected gently. Almost choked the man to death. and then somehow knocked out half the village, stripped the top and bra off of one woman, and the pants off another. Minato finished, his teeth starting to grind together. Yes, Hokage-sama, Yumhun said, bowing. Thank you for your valued service and for saving a life today. Minato sighed. The team bowed and left, and the Hokage glared at the pile of clothes and armor, the traditional Uchiha battle armor that no one had worn since the Battle of the Valley of the End. Uchiha Fugaku confirmed that everyone is in the village? Sarutobi asked. He shifted his grip on the baby so that Naruto could drink the dregs of the bottle. Yes, Minato said, his voice somewhat muffled from the fact that his forehead was pressed against the pile of papers on his desk. He was so tired he had problems letting anyone help him with Naruto. Every time the baby was out of his sight he was afraid that he would lose his child as well as his wife. Well, last time I heard, Uchiha Madara was not a female, though I have heard him called a demon before. Sarutobi said cheerfully. More cheerfully than Minato thought was entirely proper, but the old professor was probably thinking about both the topless girl and the fact that he didn't have to deal with all of this. Too bad Jiraiya isn't here. The retired Hokage mused. Minato just whimpered. The kitsune sat in a tree, munching on a bit of bear and frowning. Obviously she needed to do a better job of appearing human if she was going to expect to get close enough to find and kill the humans she needed to in order to exit this body and go about her rampaging business. Step 1 seemed to be to change the color of her chakra. She dropped the thigh and settled back against the tree trunk and closed her eyes. Immediately the kitsune was in the sewer in her proper form. She flounced down the hallway on all fours to the giant gate and the tiny human behind it. He was still yelling, "You can't do this to me, you're just a demon. I am the great and powerful Uchiha Madara, and I am your master." Yeah, the kitsune yawned. Though, Uchiha, that was familiar. That was the name of the red-eyed humans. Excellent, but not what she came for. She tweaked the seals so that they disappeared and caught the tiny human below her paw when he tried to bolt. She tilted her head this way and that before reaching down and ripping all the pitiful things chakra from him, including the dot things in his soul matrix. The human was screaming, and screaming definitely an improvement over the yelling. The kitsune kicked the human back into the cave, tightened the seals back up and opened her eyes. The blue strands were still in her mouth. She spit it out onto her hand and set about gluing the circles onto their respective parts of her body. Happily, they snapped into place with minimum fuss. She gathered chakra into her hand. It was magenta. She groaned. Ooh. Some amount of time, and another bear, 2 raccoons and a school of fish. Later, she had it. Her chakra appeared blue and felt human. It was still almost entirely her own, but she had figured out how to get the bits she had stolen from the human to filter hers and turn it into innocently human energy. Excellent. Now all she had to do was find the hidden village. She sighed. It seemed impossible. A group of ninja ran by on the periphery of her senses. Aha! The kitsune hopped up and chased after them, this time going branch to branch in the more normal ninja fashion so as not to overshoot them. She bared her teeth at the humans in a way that she hoped was close enough to the brat when he was trying to be friendly. She watched as the 3 shinobi halted so quickly that one slammed into another and knocked the first off the tree branch. The kitsune pretended to not notice, in the spirit of trying to get the humans to do what she wanted them to. Michi, isn't that the woman? Shush. The kitsune felt her eye twitching. She didn't think that comment had been soft enough for even a human to have missed what was said. Not that she knew what they were talking about. Ma'am? The one who had been knocked off the branch said hesitantly. The kitsune turned to look at him. He gulped. Would you mind terribly coming back to Konoha with us? Konoha, that was the Leaf Village. Most excellent. The kitsune felt her grin slide into being one of actual pleasure. The 3 shinobi tensed even more. Nothing would please me more, she said with complete honesty. She followed mostly content behind the one called Michi, one of them behind her and the other ranging about. The pace was pathetically slow, so the kitsune amused herself by seeing how many threads she could pull out of the vest the human in front of her was wearing, with her carefully human chakra, without him noticing. So far she had taken out 1 out of every 10 threads, and the vest was starting to look rather see-through. She switched to surreptitiously starting to change the armor plating from iron to fragile balls filled with air. It was tricky to keep the weight exactly the same. By the time she had finished that, the forest was starting to give her flashes of déjà vu. We'll stop here for the night, the one behind her said. The kitsune stopped and looked at the human. She sniffed the air. She was fairly confident that she could at least get herself going in the right direction. She grunted, then leapt in the direction that they had been traveling. She quickly regretted her impulsiveness as she landed in a section of forest that was less familiar rather than more. The damned ninja must have been traveling in some sort of bizarre pattern to confuse pursuers and prisoners. The kitsune growled before calming herself. She turned completely around and leapt back toward where she had left the shinobi. They were not where she landed. The kitsune thought with some chagrin that it might be better if she walked in a more human fashion if she wanted to figure out where she was going. But she wasn't used to actually trying to get somewhere. Usually she would just destroy whatever was around. It didn't matter too much to her what she smashed, so long as she could set it on fire later. Or during. She felt a wide smile stretch across her face at the thought. With a sigh she sniffed the air, hoping to catch a whiff of the humans. Nothing. She closed her eyes and let her chakra seep out of her body until it hit the ground, then spread it out from her as far as she could reach. She didn't feel any humans on the ground, so she slid up the trees. There were the shinobi. This time she hopped between the branches, much faster but in the same way that she had traveled with the humans. She burst through the foliage and grinned as she saw the humans. And then frowned. There were 4 of them, and 3 of them were really short. And only the tall one was wearing a vest. "Hello lady," said one of the little ones. "Hello." She cocked her head at the 4 humans. "We're coming back from helping some old lady in the woods. She had a lot of sheeps and they got lost." The little one grinned, showing a missing tooth. "I see. How kind of you," the kitsune said absently. "Well, this was probably as good a way to get to Leaf as any." "Ooh, Hokage-sama, shush," Minato hissed, but it was too late. The noise had awoken Naruto. Minato picked up the baby and crooned to him as the cowed shinobi came into his office. Minato nodded to them over the small blonde head to show them to continue. "We encountered the woman that you put out the alert on when we were patrolling the southern border." "The southern?" The Kyuubi had attacked from the north, the hidden bunker found far to the northwest, and the village was to the northeast. "Yes, Hokage-sama," the Chunin, Boshi, continued. "We asked her to accompany us to the village, and she agreed. But when we stopped to rest for the night his teammate Michi took up the story. She just leapt into the air. Despite racing after her, she was gone." "What did she look like, exactly?" Minato asked, cooing to his son. "She had long hair past her shoulders. It was a very dark brown, almost black, really. It was a bit wild, with sticks and such stuck into it. She was about 5'6", maybe 140? Her eyes were a very dark brown, too dark to really see her pupils. Pale skin, no obvious scars or clan markings. She was wearing the same clothes that were reported stolen from the village, though they were starting to look pretty dirty, and there was a lot of what looked like dried blood down her front." "Thank you, Michi," Minato said. The Kunoichi grinned and then handed the Hokage the full mission report. Once the team of Chunin had left, Minato leaned back into his chair, tipping his hat down to cover his eyes and settling the baby against his chest. He only meant to shut his eyes while he thought about this latest odd development, but sleep took him before he even fully leaned back. "Ooh." The kitsune wasn't sure if she was amused by the bouncing human kid or annoyed. The little thing kept calling her lady and would not stop her constant stream of anecdotes. "Megane, stop pestering the poor woman," the older human said, looking exasperated. "I'm sorry," she continued, talking to the kitsune now. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "That's odd," the kitsune replied. The human looked at her even as they all continued to jump through the branches. The demon was mildly impressed. It showed a minimal amount of skill. But she was certainly not impressed enough to give the human information. Especially information that didn't exist. A name? She had never really had one. Damn fox, probably wouldn't go over well, nor lady. "Who's pestering her now?" Megane asked cheekily. The kitsune turned to smirk at the kid when suddenly the forest in front of them gave way to show a large wall surrounding a thriving village nestled underneath a huge cliff with 4 faces carved on its face. The kitsune gaped and then turned around. Behind her was a long, flat road. There was no way she missed this from the air. "Hey, lady, what's wrong?" Megane asked, stopping and turning to look at the kitsune. Wasn't it a forest? Forest? Megane looked at the other 2 erstwhile silent children. One took advantage of the chatty kid's silence to speak. "We've been on the road this whole time." The kid wiped its nose on a sleeve. "Halt." The demon turned and saw a large group of humans with white porcelain masks over their faces. "Come away from her," the Anbu said, hurriedly pulling the children away from the demon. The kitsune looked at the group of them placidly. She was in the village, but these were neither the man on the toad, nor the hello. Another group of shinobi had arrived. These were all in a black uniform of sorts. "What are you doing here? This is the jurisdiction of the police, not the Anbu. This subject is wanted for questioning." The Anbu replied tonelessly. The kitsune was delighted when her suspicions were confirmed when the shinobi who had spoken to the Anbu's eyes burst into red color. The Kyubi rocked onto the balls of her feet, preparing to attack. The single comma spinning in the right eye and the two in the left annoyed her and wasn't right. The kitsune paused. There should be 3 in each, not 3 total. As she stood there undecided, the eyes of the two flanking the main one burst into red as well, both with 1 in each eye. There were so many. The kitsune rocked back onto her heels and pouted. "Come with us, please, ma'am," the Anbu said. The Kyubi sighed and complied. She certainly didn't want to go near those red-eyed freaks before she knew exactly how many there were. It wouldn't do to miss one. "Oh, Minato," Sarutobi said quietly from beside the desk. Even with so gentle an awakening startled Minato, and he reached for a kunai before he felt the weight on his chest shift and he instinctively secured his precious bundle. Who was thankfully still asleep. "No one wanted to wake you, though I gather there were a few photographs taken," Sarutobi said with a twinkling smile. "Wake me?" Minato yawned. "Why? They found the woman. She came in with Shirobama Kotoba and her genin team." "What?" Minato asked, just barely restraining himself from leaping up from the chair. "How?" "They say that she just appeared in front of them, then walked with them into the village. She seemed confused that she was not in the forest." Minato smirked. "You implemented the seal, then?" The former Hokage nodded. "When the Kyubi mysteriously left, I activated it while you were." Sarutobi trailed off. Minato closed his eyes and gulped. While he had returned to his wife's side with the wonderful news that he hadn't had to use the seal and sacrifice his soul, only to find the top medic Nin, who had been confidently working to stop the post-parturient bleeding, slowly shaking their heads and crying. "Well, it works, then," Minato said, deliberately stopping that thought process. "Amazingly well," the former Hokage confirmed. "Anyone not wearing a Konoha headband cannot find their way into the village unless they are being escorted by someone who is." "Where is she now?" "She is being interrogated." The Uchiha jerk always betrayed the brat. At first she had found it amusing to see them become close to each other and then ultimately see his poor hopes and blooming confidence in the friendship smashed. But then it became pathetic. And then it was just annoying. So she decided to change the timeline more drastically. She gave the brat his memories from one of his previous iterations. The explosion of change that radiated from that one act was surprising, to say the least. The brat had actually attempted to save the entire Uchiha clan and failed, of course, but from that he became ridiculously powerful so rapidly that Kitsune was hard-pressed to keep his growing body from breaking apart under the stress. The brat had ended up killed earlier than she was really happy with, but the ride had been much more fun than she possibly could have anticipated. So she did it again, testing out various permutations on when she gave him the knowledge, and how she let him grow up before she gifted it to him. Sometimes she revealed herself as the source of the knowledge and he would either let her out more than she ever had before, or become the recipient of intense hate when the brat denied the visions or said that she lied. Eventually, though, even those games became monotonous and repetitive. And she was still trapped. "I came from Uchiha Madara," the Kitsune said, shaking her head in annoyance. She knew that humans had short memories due to their short lives, but surely even they did not need to have so many repetitions. "Who is your mother?" She had no idea what they wanted her to say. "Amaterasu?" That was probably as accurate an answer as any. "Who is your mother? The earth? The human tendency toward violent emotion? The intense heat at the heart of a volcano? Lightning? Elements don't have parents. I don't know. Where is your father now?" The Kyubi assumed they meant Madara. The Kyubi consumed him. She repeated the truth, though she never said who the Kyubi currently was, of course. "Where is the Kyubi now?" "Gone," the Kyubi replied. The amusement over this question had long since faded. probably around the time when they had made her start changing her clothing regularly to the loose gray nonsense they had tried to make her wear. She was back in orange now, after she had lounged around rather contentedly completely naked. As she wasn't jumping anywhere, the mounds on her chest weren't bothering her enough. She felt the need to bind them and had been able to tolerate them flopping about. The Konoha nin had yet to manage to get her to put on the shoes they seemed so fond of. She slid down onto the table, laying her head on her arm and peeling the surface layer of metal off of the table and turning it into various gases in small enough concentrations she was pretty sure the human couldn't see it. "What is your name?" "Masumi," she replied. She had thought to try to make a cutesy combination of her true form and Madara like Kura or something. But just referring to herself as they were was so much easier. After the first time they called her Madara's daughter, she had taken the term for herself. Masumi, daughter. The human just looked at her. "Where did you come from?" "Okay, that's it," the Kyuubi said, getting up from the table so quickly that she knocked the chair over. "You've asked me these questions before. You haven't said anything that we can confirm as true." "How am I supposed to confirm anything? You expect all of your traumatized victims to understand everything that happened to them?" The Kyuubi left off the part where she was traumatized by being sealed inside a baby over and over again until her time trapped almost eclipsed her memory of being free. They could think she meant being the product of rape raised as a soldier for a missing nin. She growled and went to the door, letting out some of her anger by melting the entire thing into a puddle of slag and stepping through. There were shouts behind her, mostly, "Holy shit," and, "But she has 14 chakra disruptors on," but she ignored them. The building was something of a maze, so she continued to make doorways in the walls. Finally one of the melted holes led outside and she took off in a large leap skyward. The village below her shimmered out of existence and all she could see were trees stretching endlessly in all directions. Fortunately she had jumped almost straight up, so after several minutes of free-falling in confusion she fell back through the seal and into Konoha, right into what appeared to be a play group of some sort for human kids. The caregivers gasped at her sudden entrance and most were halfway to pulling their kunai when she saw him. A happy grin split her face. It was the same brat that had faced opposite the bars for that indeterminate time. But seeing him here, alone and without her, it gave her a swell of happy emotion. Separate, they were apart. She scooped the boy up and the various humans froze, hands on their weapons. "Hello there, brat," she cooed at him. He giggled. "Are you here to protect me, too?" he asked. "I came here by accident, but I'll give you a gift." "A gift?" "Yes, a very special present. I like presents. Is it a ninja thing?" The Kyuubi smiled down at the small boy. "Absolutely." She let her chakra flow out of her body and into his. It was a bit strange doing this from the outside, but it was similar enough that she didn't even hesitate. It was practically second nature to her now. Before she had learned to do this, the baby had died over and over before a month was out. But now, as then, she delicately stretched out his chakra coils until they took up more space than was actually in his small body. She compressed them and warped them into pockets of other space. "That felt weird," the boy proclaimed, twitching his nose and sneezing. "Did it?" she replied, not really paying attention. Somehow the light had gone. It was now night. And the ninjas surrounding them were different than the ones that had been before, and they looked quite a bit more formidable. "Dad!" the boy cried, squirming to be let down. The Kyuubi was barely able to set the boy's feet on the ground before he was darting over to a man in a strange red and white get-up. The hat looked ridiculous. "The nice lady gave me a present. Naruto." The human was shaking as he gathered the kid in his arms. The kitsune didn't deign to acknowledge the various weapons pointed at her vital areas. "Where'd everyone go? And why's it dark?" Naruto asked, frowning. "It's time for bed. Uchiha-san will take you back to the house, okay?" "Uchiha?" The kitsune's attention perked up and she snarled as the black-robed shinobi took the kid and started to carry him away. She stopped herself when she realized what she was doing. What the hell did she care? This particular Uchiha was different again than the three she had seen at the village entrance. How many of the bastards were there? The brat didn't usually have much interaction with the red-eyed clan before they were all nicely massacred. She had also never let Naruto save more than one or two of them, so she had never quite known that there were so many. "Why don't you come with us? We promised to ask you different questions." The kitsune sighed, but the kid was gone. The new scene was over. She felt doomed to eternal repetitions. Maybe she should just go into demon form and rampage through the village. No. Not before she found that Toad Rider and killed him in the human body, so she couldn't be trapped. Ooh, how did she get out? The Hokage snarled, angrier than anyone had ever seen the normally stoic man. What did she do to my son? We're not sure yet, but she came quietly back to interrogation. What good is that going to do if she can disappear whenever she wants and end up in our preschools? Sir, she melted through the door with pure fire elemental chakra, even wearing 14 of our highest strength chakra disruptors. She had just come out of her longest episode, yet it had been nearly a month and we were afraid she was going to die from dehydration when she suddenly started responding. Less than a minute later she was out the door, and a few minutes after that she was outside and gone. Inoichi reported the facts to the Hokage, not trying to explain or ask for sympathy. If you would like to speak to her. He sighed when the Hokage left in a flash of yellow. The Yamanaka pressed his hands together as well and shunshined after his leader. It took him considerably longer considering he had to actually cross space, albeit too quickly for the human eye to see. Whereas the Hokage had collapsed said space by activating the seal in the interrogation room observing area. When Inoichi arrived, the Hokage was glaring through the window into the cell where the woman was sitting, staring at the table. I'm going to go talk to her. And with that, Minato took the more traditional route of walking to the door in order to enter the interrogation room. The Kyuubi looked up at the man as he entered the same room she had been in for so long. He was still wearing the red and white outfit. So, this was Naruto's father, then? Something about that tickled her mind. She frowned as she tried to sort out all the overlapping memories of human details. Something sizzled over her skin and she shot upright in her chair. Naruto's father was pressing his hand to a seal that he had drawn onto the table. His fingers were touching one side of the seal, and hers the other. She quickly snatched her hand back and crossed her arms over her chest. What was that for? The man's eyebrow quirked. I needed to get your attention. He replied. Fine, you have it. How did you find my son? The Kyuubi smiled, happily recalling the scene. I fell onto him, I guess. You fell? Sure, I wasn't trying to find him. But it was nice to see him. The man leaned forward, looking about as dangerous as a human could. Explain yourself. The Kyuubi frowned and looked up at the ceiling. Why had it been nice? It was great to confirm that they were separated, of course, but there was something beyond that, too. She was vaguely disgusted with herself to realize that she was sort of fond of the brat. Ouch! The Kyuubi cried, as she was shocked again. She looked at the man and glared, then blinked when she noticed that her fingers were on the seal again. She snarled and sat on her hands. Explain why you liked seeing my son. The human said, in a fairly impressive growl. Explain why you keep shocking me. She retorted. I can't get you to answer questions when you start meditating. He snarled. Meditating? What did he mean by? Hey, this time the human had poked her in the head. Don't touch me. The human looked vaguely surprised. Like I said, pay attention. He seemed a bit calmer now. The kitsune wondered why. When you ask a question, it's usually understood that you need to wait for an answer. The kitsune huffed. The human actually smiled a bit, though the expression was wan. It usually doesn't take people days or weeks to think of an answer. What? The human had lost her. He leaned forward, serious and becoming annoyed again, she could tell. Every time I activated the seal, that was after trying to rouse you with physical means. In the past, the Anbu have resorted to every method they could think of, but you have never responded. It took me several days to create this seal, and here he tapped the table, drawing the kitsune's attention to the array, which taps into space, time, and some other technical things I'm sure won't interest you. It does its job, however, which is bring you out of that state. The Kyuubi was shocked. She felt her jaw drop open and was too distracted to close it. The human leaned forward and looked like he was going to poke her again. She dodged him and snarled, "Give me a second to think already." She pulled her hands out from under her butt and crossed them again. How long have I been in here, anyway? 23 months. The kitsune gaped at him again. She definitely did not like feeling as stupid as he made her feel. Maybe she would add him to the list of people to kill. All the Uchiha, the one who sits on the toad, and this one. She twitched at the thought of killing Naruto's father, and then had an odd sense that she was missing something. Arg, she growled as she was shocked again. She glared at the man. How long was it that time? 12 hours. I left to go take care of something. She also noticed that he had gotten himself a cup of tea. So, why are you interested in my son? I like his hair, she quipped, which was true. One needed yellow to transform the best color of red, blood red, fire red, to the amusing orange. The man's eye twitched, and he set down his cup with a decided click. What did you do to him? The Kyuubi raised her eyebrows. You mean that it's been, what, almost a day? What nonsense spacing out like that? Although she supposed the humans weren't really worth her attention, she snapped back to reality before she could get shocked again. She eyed the man's hand hovering over the seal with trepidation. And you don't know what it is yet? What? The man looked at her, confused and a bit miffed. You don't know what I did and it's been almost a whole day? She repeated. You really don't notice the missing time, do you? The man looked bemused. And of course we know what you did. I just want to hear what you were trying to do. I wasn't trying to do anything. I succeeded in expanding his chakra coils. The Kyuubi said smugly. She twitched her nose. The tea smelled amazing. And if it had been almost a day, that would explain why she was thirsty. Actually would explain why she always seemed ravenous and dehydrated whenever they fed her. Don't. She glared, as the man was reaching for the seal again. That couldn't have been that long. I'm tired of poking your head. He smirked in reply. The kitsune noted sadly that the tea was now gone. She really needed to make an effort to be aware of time passing. Or her surroundings at all, really. Habit of an infinite number of lifetimes. She supposed in the brat she hadn't needed to pay attention. He ran the everyday boring stuff. And as herself she had merely manifested when she felt like destroying something. Gods be damned, she howled as she got shocked again. The human smirking at her made her even less amused. His relationship to Naruto was rapidly becoming a moot point compared to her desire to melt him into a steaming, flaming pile of human goo. It's been almost 30 hours this time, in case you were wondering. I took the opportunity to get some sleep and catch up on my work. He steeped his fingers in front of his face and stared at her. Let's just cut to the chase, shall we? He asked finally. Are you an enemy of Konoha? She eyed him warily. No, not particularly. At least, no more than she was the enemy of all things that lived and breathed. She kept her smirk from showing on her face, however. That would probably not go very far in making her look truthful. Do you have any intentions to harm the residents of Konoha? Well, yeah. She wanted to massacre a whole clan of them, but technically, weren't the Uchiha wiped out on order of the village? She thought maybe she remembered that happening. Although, by not being in the brat, things were differ. Ow, I probably wouldn't be too upset if I killed you right now. The man glared, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her skin. Answer the question. I won't though, as that would make the brat unhappy. She smiled. How to phrase this? And I won't harm any other citizen of Konoha unless they endanger me. She paused, in the normal human manner. Or if they are trying to endanger anyone else. Which an Uchiha trying to control her would be, because then she would have to raise the whole village just on principle. You obviously have problems and there doesn't seem to be much that we can do with you here. I'm going to release you to the Uchiha clan, as you claim to be one of them. The man said, standing up. I don't want to go with the Uchiha. She protested. They aren't particularly pleased about it, either. But you will be secure with them, and you insist that you are one of them. If you wanted to be placed somewhere else you should have claimed to be part of another family. He looked like he wasn't really concerned about what happened from there. I'm not claiming anything, I am an Uchiha. That made her pause, though did this mean she would have to kill herself? If she did so, would that release her like the previous sealings had done, or would it loop her back like Naruto's had? Seeing as she had used the same one. I will pluck off your arms and shove them down your throat. She yelled as she was shocked again. For the last time, she vowed. She blinked when a stern man with dark hair and eyes was sitting across the table from her. I am Uchiha Fugaku. I am the clan leader and you will obey me. The kitsune narrowed her eyes. No, you will obey me. His eyes turned red, 3 commas in each. That was more like it. You will need eyes that are a bit more powerful than that if you want to press me into service. She gloated. And even that wouldn't work anymore. Human shells. Being controlled by that monster has changed you, I see. The red eyes narrowed. The kitsune glared. Follow me. And with that, he left the room. She debated whether to follow or not, and almost let herself lapse into a meditative state, as Naruto's father had called it, but then remembered both her vow, and more importantly, the seal on the table next to her. Even so, she was tempted to sit where she was. But not tempted enough to let this chance for something different slip through her claws. Fingers. She easily caught up to the human, who was walking. Since she didn't feel like blasting her way out again, she decided to modify his clothing like she had done with that other ninja. She changed the fan symbol on his vest to a fox face with its tongue sticking out, and started turning the color of the threads to red and made it spell out, "Kick me," in yellow. She snickered to herself and looked up. They were in a part of Konoha that didn't look familiar. The people she didn't recognize, either, but all humans tended to look alike, though these perhaps were more homogeneous than some other populations. Buildings, however, stuck out in her memory. She liked to contemplate the most satisfying way to destroy them. Fugaku stopped and turned. The kitsune was sad to see her handiwork leave her sight, though the shocked gasps coming from behind the stuck-up Uchiha made her grin. He frowned at her. "You will be staying here with Uchiha Anabi." The Kyuubi yawned and looked over at the youngish human. He looked pretty similar to all the other Uchiha. "Don't cause trouble," the human Anabi said before he turned and gestured for her to come inside. The kitsune twitched her nose and smelled something cooking, so she followed him in easily enough. "Food?" she asked hopefully. A cup of ramen was shoved into her hands, along with a pair of chopsticks. "Don't complain." Anabi scowled, before pouring boiling water into another one. "Complain? About ramen?" She took in the first slurping bite and her eyes closed in bliss. How could anyone complain about ramen? "Don't eat so fast." The Kyuubi glared at the human and wondered if he could speak in anything other than the imperative. She happily slurped her ramen up. But once she was finished, the two of them stared at each other. The kitsune wondered if he was waiting for her to start some small talk. If so, he would be waiting a long time. Though, the thought was somewhat amusing. "You will go to the room we have provided and sleep there. Do not leave the house without permission." The god's forsaken imperative again. The kitsune sighed. Apparently he had a speech impediment or something. Regardless, if the Uchiha kept commanding her, he might have to end up her first Uchiha victim. With that happy thought she went off to bed. "Why do you let them control you like that?" The kitsune stretched out and yawned before looking the much smaller cat in the eye. "Why not? They summon me and I get to destroy things without having to bother figuring out where to manifest. I always seem to manage to end up inside a mountain or out in the ocean somewhere. Most demons either learn how to target better, or just reappear somewhere else. By that time I'm pissed off. I'm not going to run away like some damned dog with its tail between its legs." "You're always pissed off." The blue cat sighed, closing its glowing eyes. "You don't have to explode all the water or earth around you, though. That causes trouble for all of us. What do I care about anyone else? I'm an incarnation of destruction, not fuzzy happy feelings." Like they'd be strong enough to even end up with a corporeal body, anyway. Can you imagine what the demon of love would look like? The Kyuubi started laughing, her bass tones rolling out through the ethereal countryside. The cat hissed and moved when the fox almost crushed her. "You are impossible," she yowled. The Kyuubi just smirked at her. "And more, you're lazy." "Your point, cat?" the kitsune said, stretching out on her back. "Oh." She was startled from sleep by a booming yell coming from outside. She struggled out of the nest of sheets she had made for herself and hopped to the window ledge. Below was the grumpy older human. She'd forgotten his name. He was waving the vest she had changed and yelling, however. She dropped out the window and he turned to face her. She scratched her ear as he postured, unconcerned with what he was trying to say. She frowned a bit when her hand hit some snags. Perhaps this regular grooming they had made her do at the other place had some merit. "Destroy you." Her interest perked up. Destruction was always good. "We're going to the training grounds now and I will show you why you do not make a fool of Uchiha Fugaku." Fighting was good. The kitsune wondered if it would be alright to kill him, since he challenged her. "Father, let me talk to her." The kitsune turned to the quiet young human beside the red-faced and screaming one. A jolt of fear shot through her. She knew this one. He was Itachi. "I will deal with this myself." Yes, Itachi. He was one that had the pinwheel red in his eyes. The Kyuubi regarded him warily. The young human looked at her with something like surprise in his eyes. "I'll fight you, old man. But don't think you'll come out of it alive." She paused and put her hand to her chin. "Actually, if I defeat you, does that mean I get to be clan head?" The human's teeth were grinding so loudly that she could have heard it even if she hadn't fixed her body with superior senses. "You will not defeat me," he bit out. "Father, I don't think." The elder Uchiha backhanded the younger. The kitsune was surprised when it actually hit. She regarded the youngster thoughtfully. Had he deliberately not dodged, or was he really that useless? If he were so unskilled, perhaps he didn't have the special eyes yet. One could only hope. Not that it mattered, he was dead either way. Training grounds, now. Fugaku bit out, before pressing his hands together before running away in a swirl of leaves and what she was sure he thought was extreme speed. Does he expect me to know where those are? Or follow him? She supposed she could do that. Or maybe she could do a demon hop? She shook herself before she started contemplating if she could do that possessing a human or not, and got lost in her thoughts. "Ma, I don't really care about him." She turned back and looked the younger Itachi over. His eyes widened, hers narrowed. If I defeat him, do I get to be the new leader?" she asked Itachi. "No," Itachi said quietly. "Well, what the hell is the point then?" She huffed. "Not even if I kill him?" "No." The boy's eyes narrowed at her. "The leader of the clan is voted on by the clan. They must be the strongest for the needs of the clan. Only part of that is being the strongest ninja." That sounded like a lot of work. But if she could manage to become the head of the clan, then maybe she wouldn't have to kill them all. She could instead use them to trap the rest of the Biju. That might be an interesting idea. The dream last night reminded her how much that cat annoyed her. Wasn't she trapped in some human already, though? That could prove troublesome. "Do you need directions to the training ground?" Itachi asked, still looking wary but being polite enough. The kitsune was rather bemused that he had turned out to be such a stick in the mud later in life. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that most of his attacks involved him standing around staring at people. "No, I don't feel like killing any Uchiha today." She tapped a hand against her arm. "Do you know where I might find Naruto's father? Maybe he would know an easy way to become clan head that didn't involve all this respect nonsense." "Namikaze Naruto?" Itachi blinked. "Do you mean the Hokage?" The kitsune stared at Itachi as many things clicked into place. She remembered now Naruto's father was the fourth Hokage, and he had sealed her into his own son. And Naruto had summoned that same giant orange frog that the jerk who had been trying to seal her had been riding. That bastard. How was she going to kill him now? She frowned. What was stopping her? She could take him. Probably. If she didn't start thinking in the middle of the battle about something else. Like how she was killing her favorite human's father. Although, what did favorite even mean? That she would try to avoid killing him if she was destroying nearby structures? That she would actively defend his body? His happiness? It seemed like she had gotten into more than a few bad habits. A punch sent her flying backward and out of her musings. "Ouch," she muttered, pulling her jaw back into alignment and healing it. She glared up at the irate Uchiha clan leader. "I said come to the training grounds," he said, his voice icy. "Like I know where those are." She shot back. "Your son was going to give me directions." She looked around and saw that Itachi was nowhere to be seen, and the sun seemed considerably higher in the sky. She sighed. "So much for not spacing out. We were told you weren't right in the head." He mused. The kitsune got up and dusted herself off. When she looked up at him, she proceeded to turn his eyebrows pink. She only got half done before he was moving and shoving her. She was so affronted that she let him. "March. I will tell you where to turn." She allowed the human to continue to push her along, though she started to walk faster and faster until they were both almost sprinting as fast as he had been when he did that silly leaf swirling thing. She felt more than sensed the fireball approaching her. The skin of her back started to tighten under the intense heat, and she was rolling out of the way before it had even fully registered. She sprung to her feet and bounced around to face the grumpy clan head. She balanced on the balls of her feet and waited for him to make the next move. The man swung his fist at her and she dodged it, but his foot was following close behind. She jumped over that as well, but it left her right in the path of the second fireball. She huffed in annoyance as the flames washed over her. Fire attacks couldn't really hurt her usual body, though this borrowed one was only mostly resistant. Another kick came through the flames and connected with her stomach. She wrapped her body around his shin and bit his thigh. It didn't do much damage until she remembered to weave in the chakra. She felt her teeth getting sharper and made an effort to restrain the energy to be purely filtered blue. "You little bitch," the man yelled, bashing her on the head with his fist. She felt something crunch and the world seemed fuzzy until she dissociated a bit from the biology of her vessel and healed the little tube that was spurting blood against her skull and squishing the gray stuff. She let the next shake of his legs send her flying. She flipped about in the air and landed on all fours and smiled at him with her teeth stained red with his blood. He rushed forward and she tried to punch at him, but it was like she had been watching fights her whole life and had never actually been in one. Her arm felt awkward and stiff, and the punch went wide. She wrinkled her nose in disgust and hopped back from a kick and then ducked under a punch. She was certainly fast enough to avoid the human, but what happened to her own body? Hadn't the previous tenant been a fighter? Shouldn't it retain that muscle memory, or whatever? HRN, she mused. Maybe not if the body was completely remodeled, down to its smallest parts, and then controlled by a completely different consciousness. You aren't even fighting seriously. You are no Uchiha. The human was babbling again. Sharingan, he called out, and suddenly his eyes were the petrifying red, though the three commas were not connected, nor were they spinning. She was so frazzled and the human speed had increased so much that his next punch connected solidly with her nose. She felt it crunch and a bit of something fly back into her skull. Fortunately, between pulling back from the brain earlier and the improvements that she had made before coming to this sorry excuse for a town, the fragment didn't immediately kill her like it otherwise would have. But she was having a lot of difficulty fixing it enough to properly see and coordinate her body while at the same time avoid another blow from the significantly faster human. She leapt over the human's head and lashed at him with fire. He dove out of the way successfully, but didn't re-engage right away. She used that brief respite to absorb the little piece of bone and set the rest of the bleeding to healing itself. Something needed to be done about this goo between her ears. It was too important and yet too prone to injury. And it was just different enough from the brat's setup that she actually had to pay some attention to healing it. The man came at her again and she shuddered a bit in despair. Destruction was good, but only when she was causing it, not being beat up by some human bug. Maybe if she could do some of those things with the hand seals. The human used another technique and suddenly she was in a place she didn't recognize, being stabbed over and over by a multitude of copies of the human. Two could play at this game, though she knew a way to make copies of herself. Or rather, the brat had used something most lives where he'd copied himself. What were the things he did with his hands? It was too hard to concentrate. They were stabbing her, but she couldn't heal, and they wouldn't leave her alone. Fuck the ridiculous hand gestures the chakra had felt like, this. She couldn't see that anything had happened, though suddenly there was a lesser pain in her cheek. She blinked and the copies of the red-eyed bug were replaced by copies of herself ripping up plants, attacking anything that moved, including some of the humans, she was pleased to note, and setting fire to various buildings. A poof of smoke drew her attention to her side where her cheek was still a bit sore. Itachi was there, kunai in hand as he stabbed behind him and dispelled a shadow clone. His eyes were red and the kitsune's heart felt like it skipped a beat before she saw the somewhat less intimidating three commas. Only somewhat less intimidating as his brother had managed to somehow knock her unconscious behind her seal by just looking at her host with those same eyes. "Dispel your shadow clones," he said, his eyes feeling like they were filling her whole world. "No," she shouted reflexively, jerking away. This was unacceptable. She needed to figure out how to kill these red-eyed nuisances as soon as she possibly could. She was shocked when her refusal worked. She had been expecting that to be an I-enforced command. "Please," Itachi said, reaching out a hand to her. She frowned in confusion. Why didn't he just make her? He spun around and dispelled another clone, but not before some fire had burned off a chunk of his hair. He turned back towards her. "My father left once he had trapped you in the genjutsu. He won't come back to stop this." "Good," she huffed, folding her arms over her chest and watching with a smirk as her clones spread even farther out and managed to make a few structures collapse. Genjutsu, that was that mind stuff. Oh, first Fox's balls on a stick. She'd been trapped in a pathetic illusion. Where does he live? I'll send more to burn down his house, too. Itachi looked almost frightened at the thought. The expression made him look more like a kid than a grown human. "No," he said, though with a bit of a waver to his voice. "Sasuke," slipped out of his mouth, too low for anyone not a demon vessel to make out. The kitsune's eyes narrowed at the name. That jerk was almost always a power-hungry ass. At her scowl Itachi fidgeted a bit. "How old are you?" She asked angrily, meaning it to be a hint for him to act his age. 11. The Uchiha answered back defiantly. 11. Fantastic, he was a kid. A kid perhaps 3 years away from killing all his den. That took the fun right out of destroying the doomed section of the village. The rest of the shadow clones poofed out of existence, and even the memories of them tearing things up and flinging them about wasn't enough to cheer her up. I'm going to bed, she announced. She flung her body into the not space and back out in the room they had given her. Realizing she could demon travel brought a bit of a smile back to her face, however. Especially since her targeting had actually worked. She hadn't ended up inside a wall, or underneath a pile of rocks, or, she coughed a few times and then retched. She felt something coming up and caught it in her hand. It seemed to be a wad of paper? There was a soft noise and the kitsune tried to turn around, only to trip, fall, and break some bones in her foot. She looked down to see that her legs were merged with a pile of fabric and that half her left foot was inside the wood floor. Grumbling under her breath, she phased enough to pull the sheets out of her limbs and get her foot on top of the floor. She healed the fractures as she turned to the source of the noise. It was an older-looking human female against the back wall with one hand over her chest. You gave me quite the fright appearing like that. The sudden flash of light made me drop the clean sheets. She tutted. You would think I would be used to it, living in a ninja village and being a genin myself, wouldn't you? She chuckled. Right. The kitsune looked at the sheets and then back at the woman. Well, you look like you could use a bit of something to eat, dearie. Ramen? The kitsune asked hopefully. Are you sure you don't want to eat something more healthy? Considering that the kitsune could run her body on dirt, she wasn't sure what the human meant. Well, all right, ramen it is, Masumi, dear. The kitsune grinned. The only problem is that our bakery and restaurant were set fire to this afternoon in an unfortunate accident. So it seems I can't make you any. The woman said, unfortunate accident, while looking right at the kitsune, who was appropriately horrified, though probably not for the exact reasons that the woman was hoping for. I burnt down the ramen stand? By the time the kitsune had helped the woman, who turned out to be named after some kind of rice, and her husband. Teriyaki? Something like that. The kitsune resolved to remember their names at least. After she had helped the two fix up the damage to their property, with liberal rearrangement of materials so it went faster, and had eaten 7 bowls of ramen, the kitsune was actually feeling pretty tired. Her body had been broken and healed and almost died at least twice, and she had used an actually noticeable portion of her chakra. She waved goodbye to the 2 older humans and took the long way back to the room, though she jumped up to the window rather than try to figure out how to unlock and or smash through the door and its wards. She curled up in her clean bedding with a bit of a sigh. It didn't smell like her but rather like some sort of fruit. And she had to rearrange it back into a comfortable circle. But at last she was able to drift off to sleep. The kitsune took to wandering about the city to keep herself from getting bored, and to avoid the humans who were trying to conscript her into fixing their homes. She had found another ramen stand after her feet carried her there without her intent. It seemed ridiculously familiar. As an added bonus, they had given her a free bowl of miso ramen when she gave them a pathetic kicked fox-kit face, but after that had made her do dishes to pay for subsequent bowls. She suffered through the indignity because, though she felt a bit guilty saying so, it was the most heavenly thing she had ever tasted. Much better than Uchiha Yoruichi's. Though perhaps that was to be expected, they were primarily bakers after all. Naruto-kun, Hokage-sama. She heard the called greeting from the back and poked her head through the doorway. She grinned at the sight of her 2 favorite blondes. She wiped her hands on her pants and rushed out to the customer side of the stand. Hey, brat, she greeted, ruffling the kit's hair. And brat's father. She smirked at the older Namikaze. You wouldn't let a poor orphan starve to death when it is within your means to provide her ramen, would you? She asked the kid's father, widening her eyes and giving him the cute face. Watch out for that look, Hokage-sama. Tucci laughed. It's deadly. The older blonde chuckled. So it is. I'll pay for you to eat with us, he said. The kitsune sat down next to the man and looked at him with tears in her eyes. You are truly a noble individual, she said sincerely. She decided that buying her ramen bumped him up to now being a favored person in his own right, not just for being the kid's sire. She worried briefly that she was going to end up sparing the whole village at this rate before she remembered that the Uchiha would rather gouge out their brother's eyes than be nice to someone. Here you 3 go, 3 beef ramen, Ayame said, plunking down the large bowls in front of them. "Let's eat," the three called out in unison, eating relatively happily side by side. The kitsune noticed that all of them were eating at speeds that she had previously thought only demon carriers could manage and tried to race even faster. A gleam came to both Blonde's eyes and they increased their speed as well. All three finished almost the same instant and grabbed the new bowls presented by the shopkeeper, who was apparently used to this behavior from the brat and his father. Naruto dropped out first, his little belly extremely distended. The kitsune finished her last round of bowls far ahead of the faltering sire and slurped down Naruto's leavings as well. Naruto complained weakly, "Brat, if you ate one more drop, your tiny kid belly will burst," she said affectionately, picking up the youngling and pulling up his shirt to display the round, taut skin. She drummed her fingers on it, then put her ear to his belly. "I think I may hear an echo, though. Your stomach might just be an intricate system of caves, specifically carved out for ramen storage," she said seriously. Naruto giggled and pulled his shirt back down. The kitsune felt the weight of the kid's father on her and looked at him sideways. "Yeah?" she finally said. He just shook his head and smiled, slurping up the rest of the broth. She was again awakened to human voices yelling. The kitsune cracked open an eye and glared at the window. This was getting old. They kept screaming to get her attention, and then made her do the most inane things for the rest of the day. She hadn't minded helping the older humans that had given her ramen afterward, but fixing the rest of the Forsaken complex was not something she wanted to do. She hoped they gave up soon since she kept carving obscene reliefs in the posts and turning things colors. More yelling startled her back awake after she had just managed to get back to sleep. Forget just taking out the red-eyed annoyances and maybe that toad-sitting bastard father of her favorite brat. This whole town was going to be thoroughly squished under a certain demon of destruction's massive paw before she left back to the not space. She went to the window and looked down, somewhat surprised that the destroyers of her peace and quiet were not the bug that she had allowed to attack her yesterday, but rather some thin older guy that kind of looked like that chronically late pervert ninja and one of the ninja that enjoyed dressing up like animals. They looked about 3 insults away from starting to actually attack each other, and both had the cronies to make it a truly riotous disaster. The kitsune perched in the window and eagerly awaited the chaos. "There she is," pointed one of the animal wannabes. "Or not. You were entrusted to take care of her, not let her roam about the city burning down buildings." "She never left the compound," the skinny puffy-haired one retorted. "Don't get technical with me. Yashara, her clone, did a lot of damage before we could catch it and dispel it. It's not my fault that the Anbu are so incompetent." Yashara replied with a shrug. "Why you, rat?" came a familiar voice. The kitsune's gaze shot over to the brat's father. He was wearing the stupid hat again. "I told you not to come here. Technically you said to leave it alone until repairs were finished," the Anbu muttered. The kitsune could hear him, and she was pretty sure everyone else could, too, but they ignored the comment. "Where is Fugaku-san? I do need to discuss the incident with him, and he has not been responding to my summons. We should move this to my office." The man was trying to sound reasonable, but the kitsune wondered how anyone could take him seriously when he was not only wearing that odd outfit, but fought with giant amphibians. It wasn't even anything respectable like, well, a fox, for example. She hopped down and stood behind the still volatile situation, head cocked to the side. She noticed the Hokage's eyebrow twitching in her direction in a way reminiscent of an ear flick of acknowledgement, but no one else seemed to notice her. "If you are going to give this Uchiha into our care, then she is ours to discipline and do with as we will. It is not our fault that you were completely unable to discern her capabilities." The kitsune crinkled her nose in amusement. That was one thing to say that to the cosplaying rat, but quite another to say that in the presence of the leader. Even not paying attention at all, she had still learned that from the brat's various terms. "You will go and fetch Fugaku-san, Yashara," the brat's father said coldly, his eyes hard. The Uchiha gulped and he ran away quickly in a swirl of leaves. He turned to the kitsune, still looking rather stern. "And you need to come as well," he said. "I was hoping that I wouldn't hear much from you for at least a few weeks." The kitsune grinned. That sounded a lot like a challenge. She would have to think of something to do before the day was out. She had already been fairly quiet recently due to the inane repairs. Painting the Hokage mountain was always a good fallback, and it had the added bonus of not being done yet in this timeline. "Minamoto," The kitsune twitched a bit and turned. The red eyes bug was there, though his eyes were not red at the moment. She still backed up warily, keeping him within her sight, but tilting her head so she could keep an eye on the brat's father as well. "Have you come for the stray you dumped onto us?" The kitsune growled so low in her throat no one could really hear it, though they did feel the increasing pressure of her wary killing intent. She had a feeling that the bug was calling her a bitch again, and she wanted to bark out that she was a vixen, thank you very much, and that she would see him dead either by her own hand or by letting fate unfold and see some insults for good measure. "I came to see why such an esteemed clan could have let a charge entrusted to them end up so unsupervised. Besides the damage she did last week, she has been spotted wandering about Konoha," Minato said, dangerously mild. "She will be properly disciplined for her actions." Fugaku replied shortly. "Wasn't it during the course of your discipline that the incident in question took place?" Minato asked innocently. "In fact, I believe you left her trapped in a genjutsu in the middle of an empty field." Fugaku didn't say anything. "Is this true, Masumi?" Minato asked her. It took the kitsune a while to understand that he was talking to her, both because she was watching Fugaku to make sure he didn't try anything, and because she wasn't quite used to the name. When Minato took a step toward her, she snapped most of her attention to him. "What?" The Hokage's eyebrow twitched warningly. She stopped herself just before saying, "Bug, he left me trapped in a cursed mind trick, yes." She bit out, turning back to give her full attention to the Uchiha. "Are you trained to escape jutsu?" Minato asked. "Escape them? Who the heck would teach her that?" Minato frowned. "How did you come back to yourself?" "Itachi hid me?" She mused over that. "He must have. Much less hard than the knot people were stabbing me, however." Fugaku looked a bit uncomfortable, though the Hokage continued to ignore him. "And the shadow clones?" he asked gently. "I was trying to fight off all of the—" She waved at Fugaku, "him that were attacking me. But they didn't appear. I thought I had not gotten the chakra flow correct. I've not done it before, only—" She frowned. "Only what? Saw it performed when she was in another's body? Only felt it done when you were not in control?" Minato asked. The kitsune jerked her head around with wide eyes. How had he known that? Did he know all that had happened? It was impossible, right? The brat's father did mess around with a lot of time and space arrays, however, she supposed it was possible. "This is nonsense," Fugaku snapped, grabbing the kitsune's arm. She spun back to face him, annoyed that she had let him out of her sight. His eyes were red, her vision tunneled into seeing them. "Get back in the house." "No." She was again surprised when she was able to resist. She broke away and shot back so quickly she ran into Minato. "I don't have to obey you," she replied, half in wonder and half in anger. "Your eyes aren't enough," she snarled at him. "Not enough?" He snarled back at her, taking a step forward. "I'll show you what is enough." "Fugaku, contain yourself," Minato said, putting a comforting arm around the kitsune to prevent her from jumping back again and bowling him over. "She has obvious issues with the Sharingan." The kitsune shuddered at the word. "My Sharingan is fully formed." Fugaku sneered. "No, the one which spins can control, yours only sees and remembers." The kitsune smirked back. "It is not as powerful. You cannot attack by simply staring." Which was probably a good thing, if her theories on how fighting by getting into staring contests with people affected your personality were correct. Fugaku's teeth were grinding again, and the kitsune was pretty sure that everyone could hear it. "If you are not able to care for a displaced member of your clan." "She is not an Uchiha," Fugaku interrupted. The kitsune felt the brat's father stiffen behind her. "I am," she protested. "How much more of one could you be?" Sure, she'd shut off that little blob of instructions in all the body's little fatty bags, but that still left the other 45. And besides, the whole clan was obviously inbred with how similar they all looked. Missing one set of instructions wasn't going to change her status as an Uchiha. "Where is the proof?" She appeared literally from the sky. "And besides, that is retarded. What do you expect us to do with her?" "Hey," the kitsune protested, only to be held back by the arm around her waist. "I expected you to treat such a delicate person who your clan has wrong with the respect she deserves." Minato growled. The kitsune wondered suddenly if he would still feel that way after she defaced the Hokage monument. "Deal with your own trash." Fugaku sneered. "I don't have to stay in this village." The kitsune huffed. Although the ramen was unspeakably better than raw bear, Maybe she could go out into the woods until she had figured out some more about the chakra nonsense. She thought she had gotten the hang of the human techniques, but apparently she had only gotten a hold of human chakra as an energy, not what to do with it. Perhaps she could rip the information out of the prisoner that was whimpering to itself inside her. Minato didn't say anything further. Suddenly, however, the two of them were in not space, and just as quickly back. The kitsune quickly checked all her limbs and found them to be free from being combined with anything. But she hadn't. Sorry for moving us like that. The kitsune turned to the human as his arm fell from around her. She tilted her head and contemplated him. He had pulled them through demon space? If we stayed there a moment longer it was going to become a political incident. He took off the hat and ran a hand through the yellow hair. The Kyuubi felt a weird sense of displacement. It should be her hand running through hair like that, in another life, another body. One that he had forced on her. How confusing. She ran her hand through her own hair only to have it get stuck. She pulled away and stuck her tongue out in disgust. Did they not help you bathe? Minato asked, plopping into the chair behind his desk. No. The kitsune sniffed and crossed her arms. Bathing was one of those things the brat had done that she hadn't paid much attention to. She vaguely recalled snatches of the people in the interrogation place helping her with it. But her mind had been so scattered before the brat's father had zapped her. Much that she hated to think that she had needed his seals in any respect. Would you like to? He asked. What? The kitsune blinked. Damn it, she'd almost done it again. Bathe? Get clean? Oh, will you help me? The kitsune watched in amazement as the brat's father turned as deep red as the markings on his robe. What did that mean? Anger? Maybe, more like, embarrassed? No. He sputtered. Why not? He looked pretty clean, he surely knew how. I'm not a pervert like. He snapped his mouth shut before he finished the sentence. I will find a kunoichi to help you. Alright, she shrugged. She would prefer a human she liked help her with it, but she supposed she could tolerate one of his subordinates. Hey, Masumi-chan. The kitsune turned around with a grin, seeing her favorite fox kid bouncing along the street towards her. It had been a while. The brat's father had passed her off to some family who was supposed to help her with her toiletries and deportment, or some such. All she knew was that the Hyuga head had deserved his present after being such an ass. Hey, brat, what are you up to? Haha, I joined the academy today. Oh yeah? She asked. Was it fun? He pouted. Of course not, which did not surprise her. They were saying stuff that dad's already made me learn. I don't care about the same stuff. I want to learn new things. The sentiment didn't surprise her, though his knowledge did. Although, she supposed it shouldn't. The kid did have his father and no demon inside him, after all. Well, you'll just have to skip ahead in years then, won't you, brat? His eyes widened. I can do that? Sure. She shrugged. Why not? Lots of kids graduate early. Why not you? Naruto grinned. Haha, good idea. How do I get them to graduate me, do you think? Definitely you need to show them that you can be an inventive ninja who adapts to surroundings with ease and knows his enemy's weaknesses. The kitsune said, leaning forward. Naruto leaned in as well, face serious. How do I do that? By playing brilliant pranks and not getting caught doing them, of course. The kitsune answered with a devilish smirk. Alright, Naruto cried, jumping and pumping his tiny fist into the air. I knew there was a reason I liked you, Masumi-chan. Of course, brat. I am the master at showing people their deficiencies. Does that mean that you'll help me with my first one? The Kyuubi gasped. You mean to tell me that you are a prank-playing virgin? She asked, seriously put out. She had obviously been negligent. It had been, what, a year or something since she'd increased his coils. And she hadn't gotten him to play a single prank? What's a virgin? The kid asked. Don't worry about that, kiddo. We're going to pop your pranking cherry today. She crouched down, digging her toes into the dirt road and thinking. You have anyone you really don't like? She asked him, hoping that maybe a specific target might give her some ideas. Not really. Right, silly question. The kitsune murmured. Even with her whispering constantly in his ear to try to make him insane, she had decided that she had to try Shukaku's method at least once, if for nothing than to be different outcome which sucked so badly she never did it again. He had still been friendly to everyone he had met. Even enemies. Hey, we can always do something to my dad, right? I heard of people doing this short sheets thing at school. She considered. Sort of simplistic, but? Sure, why not, kid? It's your first time, we can do something classic. Classic? Is that like classical? I hate that boring music stuff. Naruto's face was scrunched up as he considered the possibility. The Kyuubi stood up. You're right. This is your first time ever. We should make it completely memorable. Do you know any Nara we could bring into this? Hey, sure do. The kid grinned. Ah, you make me proud, brat. The kitsune sighed happily, ruffling the boy's blonde hair affectionately. So here's the plan. The kitsune watched from behind the prison bars. She leaned against her cage and looked on the scene with something disturbingly close to fondness. The brat was almost kitsune-like in the way he dealt with boredom. This time he was impersonating that betraying Uchiha bastard whom he had left trussed up and stuffed in a closet. She knew how this scene played out. It wasn't quite what the brat was going for, but his execution was pure kitsune-like brilliance. It was also absolutely fascinating how he managed to destroy whole social orders with kindness, of all things, rather than by blowing them up. Though he was appropriately fond of that as well. That bridge incident, for example. When she allowed him to end up on it, he was able to restructure a whole country by being, well, nice. It almost seemed more efficient to muck around with things with kindness rather than violence. In fact, it seemed that blowing shit up could sometimes bring people together. It was fairly contrary to anything the kitsune could relate to, but one couldn't dispute evidence. Especially evidence that you could play out in all its infinite permutations. Oh, how they played out. She winced against the bars. Uzumaki Naruto, you are Konoha's #1 loudest, unpredictable, hyperactive idiot nen. Kakashi said. Like usual, the brat rubbed the back of his head and grinned proudly, while his teacher looked on in bemusement as the brat proved himself worthy of the name and took the insult as a compliment. Inside her cage, the kitsune echoed that proud grin. Ooh. Minato rubbed his temples with his hands, waiting for inspiration to strike him on what to do about Masumi. The Uchiha were right. There had been no way to prove that she was their responsibility, and so their insolence had been tolerated by the council, especially considering the delicate position the village was with the Sharingan clan. They were becoming increasingly discontent. Only Itachi seemed to be sensible of the whole lot of them. But the truth was, no one wanted much to do with her. She constantly needed reminding to bathe, though thankfully didn't need help doing so after that first time. Gods. He couldn't remember being more embarrassed, at least recently. It had been years since Kushina had died and he hadn't had the time, or really the inclination to pursue another woman. Maybe he needed a relaxing role in the hay. How to go about it when he was the Hokage was the question, however. That same dilemma keeping him from doing something about his celibacy thus far. There wasn't a woman in the village, or country, that didn't know who he was, and any relationship or one-night stand would certainly not be private, and just as certainly politically analyzed. He sighed. He probably would just have to learn to deal with reacting like a virgin in such situations. That aside, the problem with Masumi was the girl kept being bounced around from one Anbu to another, staying with all the ones that lived outside headquarters for as long as they could take it before getting passed off to the next one. If only she would stop with the nonsense. She had turned the tobacco in Asuma's cigarettes to some weed that made him ravenous and entirely too relaxed. Changed all of Anko's fishnet to wool fibers, which she was apparently allergic to, set up a realistic illusion that frogs had overrun the Abarame's insect colonies, causing 2 clan members to be hospitalized from nervous breakdowns, had gotten into a brawl with the Inuzuka and all their dogs, been left in a gengetsu by Kurenai Yuhi for a reason neither of them would discuss, somehow sealed the head of the Hyuga with a branch member's seal. They were still trying to remove it, somehow switched Kakashi's Icha paradise with a yaoi, and generally made a nuisance of herself. He was running out of people to host her. She had stayed at the Ichiraku house for a while until they had gotten annoyed with her cooking ramen at all hours of the night and literally eating them out of house and home. They fortunately would still allow her to visit, as nothing had exploded. Somehow, she really was quite nice, if a bit scattered most of the time. She just seemed incapable of refraining from pulling a prank the second she thought of it. The number of times he had called her into his office was getting ridiculous. But he didn't know what to do to punish her. She was completely unrepentant, though she would fix things if he forced her to, and it was within her abilities to do so. He was hoping that she would become friends with someone, but so far the only people she seemed to like were himself and his son for no reason her could determine, people who cooked ramen and gave her some for free, and then select Uchiha, as the mood struck her. Too bad Fugaku had refused to have her in his compound. Uchiha Tayaki and Yoruchi had offered to host Masumi, even though they had been one of her first victims. He was tempted to offer her his place, but even though she seemed to genuinely care for his son, he was still wary of leaving her alone with him when Naruto wasn't in class and while he was working. Minato still remembered the terror that he had felt when he had seen her looking at him with those alien, uncaring eyes over the head of his son. He had been sure that he had lost the boy, and was trying to gather the anger to seek revenge in the face of his panic and grief. Nothing had happened, except his son's ridiculously increased chakra, but it could have. And despite how helpless she seemed now, he still didn't trust her. The woman had boiled walls, by Kami. Though she seemed to have more power with chakra disruptors on, rather than less. Which was entirely too confusing. But he might have to take one for the village. She couldn't just live in the jail, and he wasn't sure she should be allowed to live without some sort of supervision. Though it was completely unlikely at this point that she was an enemy spy, what with being half comatose for several years, she still could be dangerous if the mood struck her. Minato was not looking forward to a house turned inside out with whatever mischief she could come up with, nor a son hopelessly corrupted. Though he had a sneaking suspicion that his son might already be too far gone to end up a respectable citizen. He'd tried to stop them from meeting, but it seemed that Naruto was the one initiating all their contact. He had the Anbu keep a very close eye on the two of them, but Masumi only helped Naruto with the mildest of pranks, or more usually his schoolwork. He hated to admit it, but the probably an Uchiha was acting more like a parent than he was most days, what with all his Hokage duties. If only she could be as responsible with the families and ninja she lived with, and if only she would stop helping to turn Naruto into a delinquent. A talented shinobi of a delinquent, but still. Between her and the boy's godfather, he was fairly certain his son was going to end up a prank-pulling pervert. Hokage-sama, Namiyashi Rado said as he burst into the room. Minato had a bad feeling about this. Yes? He asked warily. The Hokage monument. With a sigh he walked out the window until the cliffs came into view. The four faces looked quite different. It seemed someone had carved them more finely and they now bore a striking resemblance to the people they were based on. That wasn't the first thing that you noticed, however. The first thing being something that gave the current Hokage a very good idea who was responsible for the upgrade. There were sayings written on all of their foreheads. The first said, "I love playing with my morning wood," in bold red letters. The second said, "Check out my special water jutsu. Golden shower no jutsu." The third's just had a large hot pink hentai covering most of his face. He looked at his with some trepidation. "So ugly demons flee my presence," was written in huge letters in a text bubble splashed over the face of the cliff. His carving also had a mustache and glasses and it seemed his eyes had been colored to look like a frog hermit. Minato wasn't sure whether to be flattered or more annoyed by the addition. He sighed again and walked back into his office. "Who is she living with now?" "She's been living at the detention center," Rado said, coughing. "Right, because no one had stepped up to take her in yet after her most recent stunt where she had somehow set fire to a tub of water and managed to explode the hot water heater." "Oh, hey Masumi-chan." The kitsune cracked open her eye and looked at the familiar face that accompanied the voice that she knew better than the one she was currently using. "My dad said that you made me have tons of chakra." "Sure did, brat." The kitsune yawned. "So? It's a pain. I can't get the clone to work because there's too much." The kitsune grinned and sat up, sensing a great prank. And she hadn't even been yelled at yet for modifying the monument. "Is that so, brat?" the kitsune said, mock thoughtfully. "Believe it," the kid pouted. "Well, I know for a fact where your father has a scroll that can teach you a better version that's impossible to put too much chakra into." The kitsune shook her head sadly. "But I know that you can't really read." "I can read, you old hag," the kid shouted, jumping up and down. "That was just that one time." The kitsune smirked internally. This was almost too easy. "Well, I suppose." She looked at him dubiously. "I guess I'll tell you where it is then. But there's no way you can learn the technique before your dad finishes reaming me out about the monument." "That was you?" The kid was excited again. "I knew it. No one else would have the, vision." "Yeah." He smiled, his eyes squinted shut in mischief. The kitsune preened. She had never managed to get the brat to praise her in all of her many lives with him. So his appreciation of her in this life had yet to get old. "Well, I did spend months planning the perfect sayings." She demurred. Tell me where the scroll is, I'll do the new clone thing and be back before they know I broke out. Why are you here anyway, brat? The kitsune asked, somewhat curious. The brat said, putting his hand behind his head and grinning. I made my sensei pass out with my Wai no jutsu. That doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would get you sent to Anbu Holding. The kitsune admitted, though I must say, getting sent here means you're moving up in notoriety. No notes involved. The kid looked a bit confused on why there ever would be, before he continued brightly. They said my father would be down here soon for some other reason, so they sent me here instead of to his office. He looked at her with a mock-serious face. That reason might not happen to be you, would it? Certainly not. The kitsune grinned. You already admitted to the monument thing. You can't pretend he's not coming to talk to you. Maybe he just likes me. The kitsune smirked. Maybe he's looking for a replacement brat. You're too old. Naruto scoffed. More like he'd be looking for a new, The kid struggled. A new rug, yeah. I think you'd be perfect for right by the door. Then we could step on you every day. He started laughing hysterically. The kitsune shook her head, glad he at least amused himself. A sudden horrible thought hit her. What if she had gotten sealed in an Uchiha or an Aburame? She never would have gotten them to pull any pranks. She would have gone completely insane in those repeated lives. She shuddered. Hey, you said you were going to tell me where to get the special scroll. That I did. 10 minutes later the brat was off on a mission to learn the shadow clone and his father was on the other side of her bars. She had a brief moment of panic before she calmed herself. It was a perfectly normal corporeal prison, and the blonde in front of her wasn't the brat. So, you had to write on the monument. He said. They had to know the truth. It wasn't the toad that scared off a giant fox, that's for sure. Foxes eat toads. She grinned. Minato's hand came up to pinch the bridge of his nose. Why do you have to do these things? I'm pretty sure it's my nature. The kitsune answered, perfectly serious. Minato glared at her. She just looked at him smugly. He should be grateful that her possession of a human form was tempering her malevolent spirit tendencies. There are no other people who will take you in. I could try the other Uchiha households. There's got to be more than one of them. She offered, unsubtly fishing for their numbers. She hadn't gotten anyone to talk about the Uchiha. They just tended to grumble when she mentioned them. There are well over 100 Uchiha households, and not one of them will take you. Over 100, with more than one to a household. Probably, first Fox's hairy balls. How the hell had that Itachi brat killed them all? Mangy cow cherry gun or no, there was no way. Not even the ramen old people? Tayaki and Yuruchi? She asked, somewhat saddened about that. They mentioned it. Minato aloud. Fugaku refused to have you in his section of the city. The kitsune added that to the growing list of reasons she needed to kill that bug. He paused as if he was about to suggest something, then shook his head. You're going to have to stay here, I suppose. He sighed, looking as if he was about to flash away. The kitsune did a quick calculation. The brat probably needed another 20 minutes to get the shadow clone down. Well, did you like my other modifications at least? I don't know who your previous artist was, but they did a piss-poor job getting a working likeness. Minato focused back on her, looking bemused. She grinned. You do like it better now, don't you? I have no idea what you are talking about. He said, not looking at her. Yours wasn't doing you justice at all. She added, not hideous enough? He asked, his lip quirking. Did I say that? She chided. No, but you wrote it in 40-foot-high letters. There is that, she conceded. Though it's only a good parody if the statement is ridiculous. Minato frowned at that, trying to figure out what she meant. She let him stew on it. By her reckoning, the brat would need another 5 minutes for an average time. She might need to get him an additional 15, though, to cover up to his slowest time. Did you just say did you just compliment? He looked at her with a suspicious look on his face. I can't help it, I think it's the hair. The kitsune said seriously, grinning. Minato flattened his hair reflexively, looking awkward and like he was about to flash away. So, what's my punishment? I suppose you will want to make someone try to get me to clean off the monument. Not try to get you to, you will clean it off. Minato said, leaning forward against the bars, his eyes flashing. I don't know. I think visitors to this city need to know the facts. She leaned back with her arms behind her head. Masumi. He drew her name out, hinting at danger. Minato. She replied in kind. He broke the seal on the door and came in to tower over where she was lounging on the bed. You will clean off the monument. She stood up and pushed into his personal space. He didn't give an inch, though he did twitch a bit and get a little pink around the edges. No, she replied, reveling in the defiance. The cat might have had something with this whole independence thing. It was fairly ironic that she was sealed so frequently. You will or, she smirked when he fumbled for something to punish her with. What could he do, really? She was living in the freaking jail. I will make it a S-class crime to serve you or sell you ramen. The Hokage smirked. The kitsune gasped. That's cruel and unusual punishment. Isn't that reserved for enemies of the state? Missing nin and traitors? Desperate times. You are a bastard, you know that? The kitsune glared. Actually, I did know that. My father was not married to my mother when I was conceived. Well, that took the fun out of the insult. I meant it in the colloquial sense. She replied dryly. Oh, is that so? The brat's father had the audacity to look unconcerned. And about to leave, she needed another 5 minutes. It's watercolor, she conceded. What? The paint it will wash off the next time it rains, or if someone hits it with a water jutsu. She said it reluctantly. She was hoping it would take them a while to figure it out, and she'd picked a day that smelled especially dry. But ramen was serious business. As was the grief that Minato was going to have to deal with when he had to deal with 100 copies of his son. She cackled to herself silently. That should make it easy for you, then. He noted. The kitsune looked at him in disgruntlement. I don't know how to manipulate water. You better learn, I suppose. He mused, a wicked gleam in his eye. Can you learn an element that is completely opposite your primary affinity? She asked, somewhat startled. Why, no, you can't. He flashed into the not space, but not before the kitsune caught his grin breaking out on his face. The poor brat didn't have a chance at being a rule-abiding citizen, with that as a father and what she had heard said about his mother. Back at the Hokage Tower, Minato arrived in a flash of yellow and several puffs of smoke. When it cleared and he finally stopped coughing, he looked on in horror at the floor-to-ceiling copies of his son. Hey Dad, came from all sides. I can do this cool version of the Bushin. Why didn't you show me this scroll earlier? Minato was pretty sure he didn't want to know which one Naruto was talking about even before his son held up the Hidden Leaf's #1 secret S-class jutsu scroll. And he knew exactly who had put the idea into his son's impressionable head. Some days, he wished he had sealed the Kyuubi and was quietly and slowly being digested in the death god's stomach. Yes, calm and quiet? Namikaze Naruto. Oh. Meanwhile, the Kyuubi had made good on the fact that the Hokage was reaming out his son to break herself out of jail and wander about in search of something to do. She was mildly hungry, but had no money to buy anything, and no real desire to try to scavenge something out of the trash or steal it from a vendor. She would probably be caught and the food would probably be cold by the time the Anbu sent her back to jail or she lost them. So instead she decided to try to track down someone who might know water jutsu. The brat wasn't particularly good with that affinity, at least when he didn't have a toad contract. Really, few people were good at such moves in the Land of Fire. Unless they were in the habit of copying people's moves. Excellent. Although, that meant that she would have to deliberately find and talk to an Uchiha. She scowled. Even though most of them would never actually develop the Sharingan and be civilians, she still didn't want to go into the belly of the beast, so to speak. She might accidentally kill someone's best friend in front of them and activate a monkey Koko thingy. Which left Kakashi, provided that he wouldn't kill her on sight for changing the pictures of women in all his books into men. The fact that he did not realize what an improvement that was showed how unappreciative he was of her brilliance. Perhaps if she changed it back? She certainly had more borrowed memories of female flesh to draw from than male. Curse her hosts and their hetero maleness, anyway. Not that either was particularly attractive, being that they were both, well, human. With that in mind, she made her way to Kakashi's apartment. Hanging from the eaves by her fingers and toes, she looked inside. She couldn't see anything. She sniffed the air, no fresh scent. She let her chakra flow out and cover the room. There were various traps, but no living presence. Excellent. She swung down and burned out the seals on the windows, using the chakra she had crept into the room via the cracks outside the frames. From behind, the protections were easy to break. She also dissolved the hooks keeping the window locked while she was at it, and let herself in. The kitsune made a beeline for the most protected area of the room, coming upon a compartment under a false bottom of the drawer. This time she simply smashed the entire desk, which happily circumvented the protections around tampering with that drawer in particular. Inside were the dog-eared copies that she had modified, as well as a selection of newer-looking replacements, though it seemed that he had only just begun to revamp his collection. She took out one of the yaoi ones she had modified. Sighing at the destruction of such art, she started to focus on shifting the ink in the page to be visions of human females with their various absurd facial expressions that she remembered from Naruto's time as a Y stud. A time loop scenario that was thankfully few and far between. About halfway through the fourth book she was done with the human female form. Now, if only they were foxes, she might enjoy them more. Now, there was an idea. Maybe not foxes, but the puffy-haired pervert played with all those dogmen all the time, right? Newly inspired, she flew through the remaining books she had previously modified, feeling quite accomplished. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" the normally laid-back ninja yelled. The kitsune looked over her shoulder with wide eyes, having completely missed the arrival of Kakashi. "I was trying to fix the books I change. I need someone to help me with a water jutsu." She smiled with closed eyes and a wide grin. The book was snatched from her hand. The kitsune's grin settled into a pleased, self-satisfied smile. Her expression slid more into confusion when he didn't say anything but just stared at the book with a face turning slowly red. Did that mean he liked it or that he wanted to kill her? "You turned the books, which you had previously changed from my beloved Icha paradise, to this?" he said, voice dead even. The kitsune nodded warily, moving her center of gravity to over the balls of her feet. "You turned it into hardcore bestiality?" he exploded. The kitsune jumped away as blue light screaming like birds defending a nest crashed into the floor where she had just been. "I couldn't stomach all the human females anymore, so I switched species." "You seem to like those dogs you." "Whoa." The kitsune barely managed to duck under the crackling attack. For the second time she could feel the pathetically fine hairs on her belly standing up and her clothing start to cling to her, a sensation that was so odd that in any other time it might have sent her to contemplation for a good couple days. She backed up hastily, angling toward the window. She felt a bad feeling settle in her stomach as the ninja shoved his forehead protector off of his eye so violently that it flew completely off of his head. The sight of the Sharingan sent a spike of fear through her, especially when she saw that the kama were starting to spin. "I'll turn them back to humans." Kakashi didn't say anything, just started flashing through a set of hand seals. The Kyuubi dove through the window just ahead of a rather impressive explosion. She barely managed to cling to the wall of the building opposite the window. She had to reinforce her nails to keep them from snapping at the sudden force. But there was no time to collect herself. She scrambled up to the roof and took off running at top speed to avoid the raging ninja. With the Sharingan active, she was only barely able to keep ahead. She was starting to get desperate. The brat's father would probably happily let her die, seeing as she had just taught his son the possibly #1 annoying skill for someone of the chakra capacity she had given him. And there was no one else who would even consider helping her. She looked over her shoulder and Kakashi was hot on her tail, and he looked murderous with his two different colored eyes under that shock of white hair. There was no way that she would be able to kill him. She was slightly faster, but had no weapons and knew no ninja techniques. Trying to rape her prisoner for how to use jutsu had been useless, as he seemed to have gone completely insane, and she hadn't made much headway in trying to remember what the brat had been doing or to reinvent it on her own. It didn't help that due to the roundabout way she had to flow her chakra to have it appear human made her control so pathetic it made the brat look like a Hokage-level medic nin. On the day that he failed the academy exam, the first time, she could only modify things on the very small scale, very slowly, great for artistic pranks, not so great for trying to kill someone. The kitsune ducked the kunai. She felt more than anything else it was thrown too hard that it built up a small pressure wave in the air, despite how sharp it was. Frustrated, she took a huge leap straight up to give herself some breathing room. Except that Kakashi managed to grab onto her ankle right after she took off. The two of them sailed over the village, except it had disappeared again due to that hiding seal. "What the?" The kitsune looked down in surprise, noting the ninja's wide eyes. It seemed that somehow he could no longer see the village either. Taking advantage of his shock, she grabbed his wrist, twisted her leg enough to make him lose his grip, and flipped him up and kicked him hard in the gut, making sure that she was pointed down and vaguely in the direction of the cliff, whereas he was pointed up and into the open space around Konoha proper. Later, Kakashi. she called as they sailed off in opposite directions. The kitsune's quick calculations were fairly good. She flew back though the seal and sped toward the cliff, while the ninja spun cursing off past the outer border. She twisted wildly in midair and managed to bounce off the rock with minimal damage to herself or the modified monument. She stopped her fall by grabbing onto the third's goatee. She took the moment to survey what she could see of her handiwork. It was starting to look a bit ragged and faded, but she somehow doubted that Minato would consider it clean. Plan 1 for getting a water jutsu user had failed. Too bad the brat's mother was dead. This left her with the Uchiha clan. She sighed. Well, that old couple weren't so bad. She perked up. Maybe they would be willing to give her some free ramen. Shred apart, Itachi said. The kitsune looked behind it, knowing that there was no one in the prison with her, but confused if the human was talking to her. What? She rumbled. The human didn't say anything else. She was curious. This was the first time she could remember seeing this particular human, though she had seen others with the red eyes, of course. The one the brat had been chasing after and the one who had set her on the city. Ah, destruction, sweet, sweet destruction. How was the human talking to her, though? It didn't make any sense. Suddenly there was pain. She didn't recognize what it was at first, the sensation was new to her. But soon she was howling and thrashing as some force pulled her against the bars. Bits of herself were pulled so strongly that they dissociated from her main body and began to leak through, looking like red soap bubbles on top of the water flooding the brat's psyche. It hurts. Make them stop it, brat. Her jailer didn't respond. Enough of her was pulled through the bars, however, that she could control the body enough to crack open the eyelids. She could see a huge creepy wooden thing with 9 eyes, most of which were open. The ones that were had different colored lights in them. The closest one was blue and looked a lot like Cat. What are you doing in there? The eye thrashed violently, but the other demon couldn't break free any more than she could. Something is wrong. The kitsune heard through the brat's ears. I think the seal might be different. Just keep going, came another voice. The kitsune screamed through the brat's throat. Everything was coming apart. She was coming apart. She couldn't hold her energy together. She was going to. The streets of the Uchiha section of town were quieter than she remembered, and the occupants looked more angry. She slipped into the little restaurant with a confused frown on her face. Masumi, Yoruchi said, sounding tired. Would you like some miso ramen? Absolutely. She grinned, ignoring whatever small human problem Yoruchi was dealing with, if it was not going to affect her ability to get free food. Come into the back room, then, Yoruchi said, leading the way past the regular customer area. It's getting rather volatile out there, it wouldn't be good for you to be seen. She looked around, worried. Oh, K. The Kyuubi said slowly, shrugging. Besides, I will be breaking in S-class law, won't I? Yoruchi asked with a wink. The kitsune responded with a grin. Take that, Minato. Inside the small back room, there was already someone else huddled over a dish. The kitsune gave the air a sniff and could scent dangos. She plopped down next to the other and stole a dango and popped it in her mouth. When the other didn't protest, she took a longer look. She was mildly surprised to see it was Itachi, and he looked more like the familiar stick-in-the-mud Itachi of the future, rather than the relatively happy Itachi from the more recent life. He looked like his friend had just died. The kitsune nearly choked. Itachi looked over at her, but didn't say anything. The Kyuubi sent some calming little chemical bits to her heart-breathing tube and sent the food out of her lungs and down the proper muscular tube. She coughed a little bit and then asked Itachi in what she hoped was a nonchalant manner, "So, you're in Anbu?" She wasn't sure if that were true or not, but she was pretty sure that he had been in the Corps when the whole massacre thing had gone down. Itachi just grunted. Crap, maybe it hadn't happened yet? If she could prevent anyone from getting the evil spinning eyes, she would be a happy fox. And possibly you have seen people using water jutsu? You know, with your eyes? The corner of Itachi's lip quirked. The kitsune took that as a good sign. Even a stick in the mud would feel more depressed if they had killed their best friend, no? Hopefully he was just distressed thinking about it. I don't know that I could have seen anything if I wasn't using my eyes. He commented. The kitsune grinned. Cracking jokes was more like the cute chibi Itachi, not homicidal Itachi. You know what I mean, brat, the sharing gum eyes. Sharingan? He asked dryly. Yeah, 'cause I need someone who knows how to use a water jutsu to help me out, and fire nin around here don't tend to know any. So do you? She asked hopefully. And maybe if she got him to come with her, she could figure out how to kill him before he killed his friend. Yeah, right. She would have to catch him really unaware. Maybe if he was contemplating killing his clan, she could convince him to get really drunk. She looked at him with squinted eyes. Was he old enough to drink? I do, Itachi said finally, picking up a dango and staring at it. Well, would you like to help me wash off the Hokage monument? She asked hopefully. He dropped the dango and stood up abruptly. Yeah, let's go. Whoa, wait. Itachi looked at her in annoyance. Do you want me to help you or not? I would love for you to help me, she said sincerely, but Yoruichi is making me ramen. She gave him her best cute fox kid face. He sighed and sat back down on the chair. Yoruichi came in with the steaming bowl of ramen right after Itachi picked up the dango again, and she smiled happily. Let me know how they taste, Itachi-kun. She set the bowl in front of the kitsune and dropped a pair of chopsticks next to it. And here you go, dear, you're looking thin. You tell those Anbu they need to feed you more. And the Hokage not to restrict your diet as punishment. Yes, Yoruichi-san, the kitsune said dutifully. She grabbed the chopsticks, broke them apart and grinned. Time to eat. After she had slurped up a majority of the noodles, she noticed that Itachi was staring at her. What? She asked as she fished out some of the last noodles so she could drink the rest of the broth. How did you manage to evade the Hokage for the past week? He was looking for you everywhere and had most of Anbu hunting as well. The kitsune scowled. A week. She hadn't realized it had taken her that long to fix all those comics. Speaking of, maybe she should break back into Kakashi's apartment and get rid of, or keep, the dog ones. Where was Kakashi all week? Itachi looked confused at the seeming non sequitur. He is on a mission to Sand. Why? The kitsune was pleased to note that the Uchiha was looking less grim and murderous as the conversation was wearing on. Excellent. No monkey bow, and Yoruichi could continue to live and give her ramen. Yoruichi and her husband being two of the 5 people who were currently talking to, and feeding, her, she would really rather they stay part of the world. Well, then he really shouldn't be surprised when people have broken into his apartment when he leaves for that long. She huffed before tipping the bowl and slurping up the broth. You were in Kakashi's apartment the whole time? He looked scandalized. Why? I was changing his dirty manga into something he might like more, but then I sort of got sidetracked. The kitsune replied. Itachi stood abruptly. Let's go do this. I have a mission. Then he was quiet again. A mission? What was the brat talking about anyway? How depressed he was about it. You might think that he had been ordered to kill the Uchiha. Oh, that would explain a few things, actually. Sure, it shouldn't take long with jutsu involved. That bastard Hokage wanted me to do it by hand or some nonsense. Yeah, Itachi replied as he stood and dropped the dango back onto the plate. She noted that the only one that seemed to be missing was the one she had stolen. The kitsune watched the Uchiha as they jumped over the rooftops toward the monument. She saw a couple of Anbu in a searching pattern and nonchalantly got closer to Itachi so that the Anbu thought that she and Itachi were partners. The ninja were probably looking for her, and no one would expect her to be with an Uchiha nin. They got to the monument without incident, and Itachi stuck to the side of the cliff and started blowing water out of his mouth. The paint was gone in all of 10 minutes. Then the Uchiha just stood there, staring off into nothingness. It was a bit creepy. If this was what she looked like, the kitsune had a new appreciation for the people who would put up with her when she spaced out. Not that anyone really put up with that. Hey, Itachi-kun? The kitsune started, not sure how to bust out the, if you want to kill your family, let me help. Maybe, I only hate your father, can't we just murder him? And maybe that Kakashi look-alike would work better? Itachi looked at her, his eyes bleak. He didn't seem to even notice that she was clinging to the first nostril to avoid falling off the cliff, rather than just sticking to it with chakra like he was. You want to? Talk about anything? No, I know I haven't really looked you up recently, but we are like cousins or something. Probably. Itachi stared at her in something akin to horror. Well, he didn't have to get that worked up about it. She was a nuisance, but the rest of the Uchiha seemed to be dealing with it through denial, and he was going to kill them all anyway. Oh. If she were an Uchiha, maybe she would need to go, too. She huffed in frustration. This wasn't working. Listen, I'll just stop dancing around this whole thing, because I apparently suck at subtlety. Apparently? Itachi asked dryly. She glared at him but didn't let the comment sidetrack her. I know that you are going to kill your claw. Itachi's red eyes were suddenly in front of her own and his hand was clamped over her mouth. How did you? He looked around, noticing that they were completely exposed. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed the two of them hanging out like living zits on the first stony face. He rushed them off in a swirl of leaves to a secluded little bowl in the forest somewhere. He set her down, none too gently either, and repeated the question. How did you know that? His stare was intense. This wasn't working very well. Not that hard to figure out. She admitted. Heck, she'd not been paying attention to the whole deal. Though in retrospect maybe she should have. But no harm so far. She inhabited the only body that knew the Manki Koi thing. She hadn't been expecting her comment to cause Itachi to react so extremely. The teen sank into the crouch and started rocking, eyes staring down at the ground looking totally lost. It's sort of clear you don't want to, so, why did? The kitsune asked. She felt that it was a pretty logical question. I can't disobey orders, he whispered. And father is trying to start a civil war. We've seen enough war. I've seen enough. Konoha won't survive another one. The kitsune hummed thoughtfully. She was somewhat lost as to how this quivering ball of patheticness was tapped for this kind of mission. No offense, but I'm not really sure how you're going to pull this off, kid. You know how I can, he said, looking up at her with black eyes that looked like holes in his pale face. The mango cherry eyes aren't that powerful, kiddo. Especially if they're new to you. Her extensive dealings with the eyes had made sure she knew that. Sasuke had been able to use it, sure, but in loops where Naruto managed to kill him within a few months to a year after he killed his brother, it was a one-man job. Later, when Sasuke had gotten practice, it was a whole team effort or a wait until he dies of natural causes situation. Mangekyo Sharingan, he absently corrected, dropping his head onto his knees. There is no other way. Yes, because murdering your best friend, then using his death to help you systematically murder a significant portion of the village, including your mother, including your little brother. Yes, that makes sense as a way to preserve peace, the kitsune said in annoyance. This sounded like the kind of plan she would come up with. That is, harebrained and with excessive violence. Minus the money crow, it sounded like an excellent idea. Itachi has flinched throughout her comment. With the Mangekyo Sharingan, I could make them slip into the genjutsu, and then they won't feel a thing when I. He choked off the end, unable to finish the sentence. He looked very small and kid-like. She blamed the human body's female hormones for her desire to give him a hug. There was something about the emotionally constipated Uchiha breaking down that had a special spot in her hormone's heart. She sighed. Can't you think of some other way? Aren't you the clan heir or something? Just challenge your father. I wouldn't be able to beat him without overwhelming evidence of power, and they would know that that Shisui. I see your point. It was basically the same reason she had been messing around with relatively harmless pranks instead of picking off people as subtly as she could. As stupid as humans were, they tended to notice when one, much less several hundred of them showed up dead. Itachi let out a shuddering sigh and the kitsune couldn't take it anymore. He might be a ninja, but he was still just a kid. She gathered him up in a hug and rubbed her hand along his back, muttering nonsense into his hair. She was obviously being influenced by the insanity of her prisoner and the body she was inhabiting. Especially since she wasn't as disgusted with herself as she felt she should be. Now, we'll think of something, okay? Did the Hokage put you up to this? If so, she would be ecstatic. She could drop her waffling weak human attachments to the man like a rotted corpse and kill him, kill her current body, then go on a demonic rampage. Such appalling abuse of his power for those in his charge would be unforgivable. Even the kitsune had to draw a line at betraying underlings. No, he muttered into her shoulder, before pulling away and looking completely embarrassed. It was Danzo-sama, the head of my division. Danzo. That name seemed vaguely familiar. It brought up thoughts of frustration and mindless raging hate. Apparently the brat of the future hadn't liked the man. Drat. Not that she thought Minato would be so bloodthirsty, but there was always hope. Though why she cared was somewhat mysterious. She was definitely getting too attached to these humans. Maybe she could just sterilize them all instead of killing them? Keep them as pets and wait for them to die off? Then she could have fun with them for a while before going back to rampaging and mayhem. If I had someone to teach me about it, I would feel better about taking the next step. Itachi looked at her somewhat hopefully. Oh hell no. That manga kibble eye is nothing but trouble. Don't look at me, I'm not helping you with it. You can't even talk about the act needed. Anyway, how do you think you'll be able to pull this off? She was almost embarrassed that by not decimating the population of Konoha she had made such a badass ninja turn into a pansy. I don't know, Itachi muttered, pulling himself up. Well, you should confront your father more directly or something, if he's being an ass. Yoruchi-san can't possibly approve of this. There were plenty of non-Sharingan civilians in the clan, after all. No, Itachi shook his head and got a firm scowl back on his face. The kitsune cursed mentally. She might be able to kill the Uchiha, but could she do it without activating Sasuke's eyes and without tipping her hand to Minato to seal her? Probably not. He took off and the kitsune scrambled after him. Itachi, wait. She managed to catch up with him, but he wouldn't look at her. Don't make me add you, he murmured. If she had been anything less than demon-enhanced, she would have missed the comment. Masumi. The kitsune winced. Good work, Itachi. The kitsune and the troubled Anbu stopped at the Hokage's call. Yes, sir. Itachi muttered. Come back to my office, you two. Minato had his hands on his hips. I must say I'm a bit disappointed with you, Itachi, aiding and abetting the criminal. He was grinning, though. The kitsune looked at Itachi, who was back to looking like someone had killed his puppy. She turned back to Minato. There are plenty of people willing to break rules for me, she boasted, crossing her arms over her chest. Itachi is just one of my favorites. He likes to tell me state secrets. Is that so? Minato replied, not giving her claim any credence. The Anbu to either side of him stiffened, however, and Itachi was looking at her incredulously. Yeah, you know these Uchiha. Itachi looked like he was about to murder her right then and there if she didn't shut up. They're all far too serious about things. If you can read their grunts, it's like a world of information opens up right in front of you. Itachi relaxed, though Minato was now looking at the younger shinobi thoughtfully. Well, are we coming back to my office, then? He asked mildly. I believe that on top of the 2 infractions from before, you might also have to answer for a small house fire. They headed off for the tower, Itachi following reluctantly when the Anbu made as if to stop him when he tried to continue toward the Uchiha section of town. The monument is clean, the kitsune huffed indignantly. And Kakashi set fire to his own apartment, believe it. Minato looked at her oddly. Kakashi isn't back from his mission yet. Sure he is. Oh. Well, he was, but then I think I flung him out of the hide the village zone. She smirked. Serves him right for not appreciating fine art. That took me a week to do, you know. The Hokage groaned as they made it to the tower and started to climb the stairs. Your modifications aside, Kakashi is a shinobi of Leaf. He can't get lost outside the village. Well, he certainly couldn't see it when we were fighting above it. She replied. And then I kicked him off towards the forest. She waved vaguely in the direction in question. He was looking with the red eye thing, too. Minato's eyes widened and he turned to whisper to one of the Anbu, who took off in the direction that the kitsune had indicated. Finally in the Hokage's office, he motioned for them to sit. So, why Kakashi? He asked tiredly, pulling out a piece of paper from a stack. I figured the only people in the village that would know water jutsu aside from you would be the ones with the copy eye. I don't know any other wave refugees or their spouses. She shrugged. And the books? I hoped that if I turned them back, then maybe he would be more likely to help me. Minato looked at her from under skeptical brows. I take it you didn't turn them back so much as modify them more? There may have been a switch in species. The kitsune allowed, scratching her chin. Minato sighed heavily. And Itachi? He just happened to be at Yoruchi-san's place. The kitsune noted the Hokage's sharp look and continued. Where I ate dango. She smiled smugly. Literal truth. That she had also had ramen wasn't something she was going to confess without a bit more effort on Minato's part. How was she going to get more if she did that? She turned to look at Itachi for confirmation, but he was not paying attention. I see. Hokage-sama, I must protest. A voice came as the door burst open. A man covered in cloth limped into the office. You can't question my Anbu here without my permission. Excuse me, Danzo. The Hokage said coldly. But I may question whomever I wish to, wherever and whenever I wish to. Especially when they attack national monuments with elemental jutsu. Oh. Danzo looked a bit startled, like he had been expecting Itachi was being questioned about something else. Danzo, eh? The kitsune smirked, her grin wide. The Hokage and Itachi looked worried, whereas Danzo merely looked angry. Masumi, I have heard of your exploits, and advised the council to keep you locked up more than once. Danzo replied, you do seem to be prone to overly aggressive responses. She allowed, I wasn't aware that you had had contact with Danzo, Masumi. Minato looked quite curious. Oh, I haven't. When she was in control of the body, anyway. Just what I've heard from Itachi. She started to squirm in pleasure at the intense looks that she was getting from everyone, curiosity from Minato, anger from Danzo, and a frantic silent plea from Itachi to be quiet. She wasn't sure she would be able to drag this out much longer before blurting out everything she knew about the whole mess. What would that be? Minato asked, seemingly nonchalantly. I'm sure that Danzo-sama makes you aware of all the orders he gives to his Anbu with regards to their dealings with civilians. The kitsune replied demurely, leaning back and studying her nails while watching the ensuing chaos in her peripheral vision. Minato gave Danzo an extremely sharp look before turning his full attention back to her. The Anbu should have no dealings with civilians, he said, low and dangerous. Oh, who does, then? The kitsune asked, genuinely curious. The Konoha police, Itachi said softly when the room stayed silent with the rising tension. Well, that would explain it, then. The kitsune said innocently. Seeing as the order was to get rid of the military police, right, Itachi? They're your clan, aren't they? Itachi winced. Minato shouted an angry question, but the kitsune couldn't reply, as she was dodging the suddenly agile cripple. She flipped over the back of her chair to avoid the first kunai, but couldn't quite avoid the second, which nicked her shoulder. She immediately stopped the bleeding, but it meant that when she leapt into the corner of the room up at the ceiling she couldn't hold her grip and immediately had to bounce again and run along the bookcase. She ducked behind Minato and used him as a shield from the enraged mummy. Danzo! Minato exclaimed, shocked. She is blurting out state secrets. Danzo's eye was bloodshot and the old man was looking less composed than usual. Seeing as Masumi is the only one in this room without a clearance level, I doubt somehow that this is really a problem. You fool. The Uchiha will have heard of the plot now. Danzo spat. I'm pretty sure that I merely hinted heavily at the state secrets, but you just blurted them out. The kitsune pointed out helpfully. What orders did you give to Itachi with regards to his clan, Danzo? Minato said warily, fairly sure he knew the answer already. Only the order you and the old fool were too weak to know needed to be given. Danzo spat, giving up on trying to kill the kitsune as she had a firm grasp on Minato's silly robes and wasn't letting any portion of herself become visible except for one eye over his shoulder. Itachi was similarly using his ninja skills to subtly blend in with the far wall. You ordered Itachi to kill his clan? He's a pacifist. The Hokage sputtered, disbelieving. He knows what needs to happen for the greater good. Danzo said smugly. Meaning you brainwashed him. The kitsune muttered from behind her protector. Visions of a pale, dark-haired boy with a plastered-on smile and no social skills and a laudable love for the arts swam before her memory's eye. That had been a pretty frustrating situation in all the time loops. I will deal with you later, Danzo. Minato hissed. He moved for the door and the kitsune hung close to his robes. The mummy looked more smugly satisfied, but she didn't trust him not to try to kill her again. Itachi, you stay right there. Any order you have gotten from your commander is hereby countermanded. Minato said coldly. He stopped before the Anbu at his door, who was looking quite concerned with what he must have heard from inside. Wolf-san, please call the council together for an emergency session. The Hokage said, sweeping past him. I will be there momentarily. I need to speak with my predecessor. Fortunately, the old Hokage's house was quite close to the tower, though it probably wouldn't have mattered where it was as Minato took the demon space to the former Hokage's living room. He left so quickly the kitsune barely managed to follow him through not space. He looked at her in puzzled shock. Minato, the old monkey said in surprise, dropping his pipe into his lap and cursing as he slapped his smoldering robes with the newspaper he had been holding. Hiruzen, did you know anything about this? Minato growled. The old ape seemed lost. The planned Uchiha massacre to prevent them from causing a civil war. The kitsune clarified helpfully. Hiruzen's mouth dropped open. What? Someone killed the Uchiha? He was turning dangerously pale. No, though Danzo ordered it. But, how did you find out? Minato crossed his arms over his chest and looked lost. Masumi reported it. They both turned to stare at her. The kitsune fidgeted. What? I told you I only had the best interests of Konoha in my mind, etc. She mumbled, which was basically true. Sort of. Well, not really at all, actually. I called a council meeting and I would appreciate that you were there. Minato said finally, after they had both finished studying her. Of course. Sarutobi stood up quickly from his chair and made his way to his rooms. I will be there as soon as I change. I wouldn't miss this if you sealed the door with Heaven's seal. Danzo has finally overstepped himself. He grinned happily. We will meet you there. Minato said. We? The kitsune asked. She had been planning to find someplace to hide out for a while. Yes, we. You have some explaining to do on how you knew what was happening. Minato fixed her with a sharp gaze. Animal instinct? The kitsune offered. Minato just gathered her close and pulled them into not space and into the corridor just outside the council rooms. Many people were already arriving. The kitsune spotted the Hyuga head, branch seal still on his forehead, walking into the room regally. So collected was he trying to be that his eye only spasmed uncontrollably when he saw her, rather than the last time he had met up with her and had tried to close off the chakra flow to her brain. I don't really have to go in there, do I, Minato-kun? The Kyuubi purred, leaning forward to close the sliver of remaining space between them and rubbing her cheek against his jaw. A big strong man like you can handle it without involving me. Nice try, Minato said, though his voice sounded a bit strangled and his face was turning quite red. He shoved her in front of him and marched her into the council room. The kitsune was amused and somewhat alarmed that everyone immediately focused on her with looks that held varying degrees of hatred. He pushed her into the seat to the right of his and sat down. The kitsune fidgeted as they waited and started to turn the top of the table into a poisonous gas before Minato glared at her. Just enough for myself, she muttered in protest before sitting back with a sigh. The former Hokage entered the room, wearing the silly robes but no hat and sat to Minato's left, murmuring greetings. Itachi was standing behind the Hokage's chair, looking torn between being relieved, horrified and depressed. Danzo was surrounded by some Anbu who were aggressively facing other Anbu. There were Uchiha police scattered about looking lost. The council was mostly glaring at the kitsune. The door burst open, startling even the shinobi. The red-eyed bug flew across the space to the Hokage's table so fast that he almost might have traveled through not space to get there, his Sharingan active and quivering on the edge of swirling. The kitsune was so terrified at the sight and silently willing them to not change that she almost missed that she was slammed up against the wall with a sharp kunai at her throat. Fugaku! Minato yelled, looking appalled at the chaos and his seeming inability to control it. The Uchiha head ignored him. This is all your fault, isn't it? He growled. I just saved your clan from getting slaughtered, you ungrateful, traitorous jerk. She hissed in reply, as loudly as she could without moving her throat and getting it cut. He pressed the kunai closer. The Hyuga moved as if to disable the Uchiha, but was reluctant enough to rescue the kitsune that a step forward by one of the Uchiha police was enough for him to give it up as a bad job. Fugaku, we called this meeting to try to find a way to resolve our differences. Let's not escalate the confrontation over a personal grudge you have against Masumi. Minato said placatingly. Are you telling me that she did let the duplicity of this town come to light? The duplicity of my son? He glared at Itachi, whose Sharingan had activated reflexively at the beginning of the violence. We're a part of the clan, too. The kitsune rasped in protest. If you're going to do shit that is going to make Konoha take action against the group, we have a right to interfere. Fugaku shouted in her face, spittle flying, you are not part of our clan, you bitch. If the blade hadn't been actually digging into her throat, she would have protested that she was a kitsune, thanks. As it was, she used her enhanced muscles to push the man's arm away just enough that she could reseal her hard-breathing tube. I am a part of your clan, and I already told you that you needed more evolved eyes to scare me. She sneered. Minato looked like he wanted to hide his face in his hands as the kitsune antagonized the already volatile man. Oh, you mean the ones you can't even say? He pressed against her, and the kitsune had to use all her strength to keep him from cutting her head off, much less break the skin again. Say it. Say what it is called. No, say it. You know what that hateful thing is. Why do you need me to say it? The kitsune asked, her eyes widening in fear. She had deliberately avoided saying its name. Damned if she was going to be the one who brought it back into the world where it could harm her. Say it, Fugaku growled, pulling out another kunai. The kitsune gulped. She was using both hands to ward off the one at her throat. Fugaku, stop this at once, Minato said. The Anbu made as if to move, and so did the Uchiha police force. They stared at each other warily, reluctant to start overtly fighting. Say it, he growled low, poking the kitsune in her belly. Mango Coke Sherry Gum. The kitsune sing-songed, sneering. Say it, or you will be seeing your guts on the floor. I won't, and you don't have the eyes to make me. Say it, or I will start this battle, and you and Minato-chan will be the first casualties. The Kyuubi's eyes slid over to the Hokage. He could take care of himself, right? She eyed the rest of the council. They seemed torn as to which side to take. And then we will make sure that Naruto has a long, painful death. Mangekyo Sharingan, she roared, her vision going red from pure rage. Except that her vision also seemed extraordinarily sharp. And everyone seemed to be moving as a snail's pace. She locked eyes with the wide ones of Fugaku and she could see right into his thoughts. His disgusting, self-serving thoughts. She snarled and kicked him away from her, following him to the ground and staring deep into the middle pupils of his red eyes. Squirm, she hissed. He started screaming and thrashing under her, before going limp with an expression of sheer terror on his face. No one hurts the kid. The Kyuubi growled, grabbing the passed-out Uchiha clan head by the hair and slamming his head against the floor once for good measure. She sat there, straddling him and breathing hard until she noticed the silence in the room. She looked around and everyone gasped and stepped back, except for Minato, who was walking towards her with his arms held out, and Itachi, who was staring at her in shocked disbelief. Masumi, come away from him, all right? Minato said gently, holding his hands out to her. She looked at them and then reached forward. Hokage-sama, don't, shouted one of the Anbu. The kitsune reflexively looked at him and he fell to the ground with a gasp. Others started moving but Minato shook his head at them decisively. Come on, Masumi, he said gently. The fox put her hands in his and allowed him to lift her up. Would you please release Badger-san? He asked politely. Masumi looked over with a wry smile. Ah, I think he'll need to come out of it on his own. You little. The Hyuga started, before the kitsune glared at him and he slumped over in his seat. Masumi looked over toward Minato and focused on his nose before closing her eyes. It annoyed her to find that his nose was no less visible. It is a horrible technique, she whispered, dizzy at the implications of her new eyes. On the one hand, this solved her problem with not being able to focus her chakra enough to win in a fight. On the other hand, she now was the one thing she hated in this world more than being sealed. You are an Uchiha. Someone shouted. She twitched and glared, but didn't open her eyes. It was disconcerting being able to see through her eyelids, but it seemed to mitigate the effects of the Mangekyo Sharingan. What are you people, deaf? I've been saying so for years. Damn humans. She should hypnotize the lot and slit their throats. She should do that right now, in fact. Minato's hands were warm on her own, however, and she didn't want them to be cold with death. She felt the power slide out of her eyes and she opened them with a sigh. If you had shown your Sharingan, that would have been definitive proof. Minato said gently. But, the kitsune trailed off from her reflexive protest, before the corner of her mouth quirked up. So it would, wouldn't it? She decided not to mention that she both hadn't thought about that before, much less that she hadn't known that she had it at all. The fallen Anbu groaned and stood up. The eyes of the room focused on him. Badger-san, what did she subject you to? One of the council members asked. The ninja shuddered. A room with a moose. A room with a moose? The council member was confused. That doesn't seem so bad. Then you ask her to trap you in a room with a moose for weeks. The Anbu said, glaring. You were only down for a few moments. The council member protested. The Anbu just stared at the council member until they coughed and looked away. The Hyuga was quick to rouse afterward with a groan. He looked around before announcing, I'm not going to talk about it. And then not saying anything else, no matter what the whispered protests were. We called this meeting for a reason, Minato said, moving to drop the Masumi's arms. She tightened her grip, looking up at him with wild eyes. He sighed and guided them both to their chairs and gently extracted his left arm. Impressive displays of Kekkei Genkei aside, we have not resolved the issue of Danzo's unauthorized actions, nor the concerns of the Uchiha clan. It was a long but productive evening that lasted into the early morning. Everyone relaxed marginally when Misumi passed out on the Hokage's shoulder, though the tone was still somber. Fugaku had yet to wake up from the Gengetsu, even when the Anbu and military police together carried him to the Anbu holding cells. Minato looked down at the sleeping woman and couldn't help the fond smile. She looked so deceptively innocent when she was unconscious. And she had only activated her eyes when his son was threatened. As anyone knew, the way to Minato's heart was through Naruto. And now everyone also knew that threatening Naruto was apparently the way to Misumi's rage. With a resigned huff he gathered her up into his arms. She sighed and curled against his chest but didn't wake up. He nodded to his assistant to take the papers and file them, and then walked out the door and towards his house. Like Hiruzen, his house was very close to the tower was one of the benefits of being Hokage, or retired Hokage. He had to shift Misumi to being slung half over one shoulder in order to open his door, but even then she didn't awaken. Minato frowned a bit in worry. He didn't think that using the Mangekyo Sharingan was supposed to cause chakra exhaustion, but she seemed fairly out of it. Minato lowered her onto his most comfortable couch and covered her with a blanket from the closet. He sent up a quick prayer that when he woke up he would still have an intact house before going off to his own bed. Naruto raced down the stairs, making sure to make lots of noise so that his father would wake up. He knew that his dad had come in really late. He was in the academy already. No ninja would miss such a detail. But being out late didn't mean he got to skip breakfast. That's what the ninja code said, after all it was in print. He stopped though when he noticed that their couch seemed to have acquired some sort of odd growth at one end of it. Eh? The boy grunted, looking at the pile of blankets. He poked the mound and got a grunt in response. Who the heck was sleeping on their couch? Naruto pulled the blanket away and revealed tangled hair so black it had blue highlights. Naruto grinned. He leapt onto the blanket and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Hey lady, time to get up. You can't hog our couch all day." The kitsune jerked awake, thrashing around so much she toppled both of them to the ground. "Brat, I am going to beat you so hard your fool father will be sore," she roared, struggling to untangle from her nest. "Blia," Naruto said, holding the edges of his mouth with his fingers and sticking out his tongue. "You have to catch me first." Misumi crouched on all fours, glaring up at the boy through tangled bangs. "I'm very quick, brat. You sure seem confident for a midget." The boy flashed through familiar hand seals. "Kage Bushin no Jutsu," he cried, and suddenly the room was filled floor to ceiling with shadow clones. "You can only catch me if you know which I am," a chorus of voices cried. The kitsune's eyes glinted. "I'll have you know I'm an Uchiha, brat. We have advanced eye techniques that let us see through these things." "No fair. That's cheating." The Narutos pouted. "True," she replied, "especially when I've already got such an advantage." She grinned and leapt at the closest Naruto, who disappeared in a puff of smoke. "Ahaha. Try again, slow poke." The Narutos took off to various parts of the house, the kitsune dashing after them and smacking them hard enough to dispel them, but as lightly as possible so that if she hit the real Naruto it wouldn't hurt him. She poked a clone in the forehead that was pulling down his eyelid with his finger, and when it dispersed she was pointing at the bare chest of the brat's father. "Good morning," she grinned. She poked him on the chest in a short jab, causing the man's look of absolute horror to turn to one of annoyance. "What was that for?" he grumbled, rubbing his eyes. "And what is the meaning of all this? I had to make sure you weren't a hanged shadow clone, which is pretty much the meaning of all this. Your son started it." Misumi decided that since the Hokage didn't seem inclined to do much besides blink that he was giving her permission to take a good look. The fact that he was trying to simultaneously wake up and recover from a wave of adrenaline was of no consequence. Normally she wouldn't think a human body attractive, but something about his shape was definitely pleasing. Maybe it was the toned body? No, she had seen plenty of muscled humans before. The pale skin? Probably not. The lack of fur was more disturbing than anything else. Although, it did serve to highlight the hair he did have, which was all that fabulous yellow. The kitsune was amused and somewhat concerned that her hand was itching to feel what the fine hairs on his chest felt like on her palm. She swallowed when she realized she was drooling. "Hey, you stop trying to catch me." The Naruto pouted next to them. "Naruto." Minato blinked at his son, still looking adorably half asleep. The kitsune frowned when she ran that thought back through her head. "Adorable? What have I told you about jutsu in the house? Yeah, the brat pouted. But you also said that we had to wear pants when company was over. With that the shadow clone dispelled itself. Minato looked confused for about 5 seconds before he looked down at himself in horror. He was dressed only in a pair of boxers with little bowls of ramen all over them. We could forego that rule. The kitsune offered hopefully. Minato stepped back into his room and slammed the door. She sighed unhappily and walked back down the stairs. Brat, where's breakfast? She called. Almost done, came a voice from the kitchen. A Naruto with a bandana tying his hair back and an apron on popped his head around the doorframe. You like sweet toast, right? Sure, brat. Masumi sauntered into the room and flopped down at the table. She watched the 3 Narutos bustling about. Minato was down a few minutes later, wearing pants that stopped mid-calf and a loose t-shirt. And his wounded dignity like a protective shroud. Thank you for cooking, Naruto. He said, sitting down stiffly. I thought you said there was no one who would take me in? The kitsune asked, her tone a bit sharper than she intended with disappointment over the amount of clothing. Better than the robes, she supposed. Minato frowned and picked at the wood on the edge of the table. There isn't anyone else, and you couldn't go back to the jail. Fugaku is there, so? Masumi pouted, annoyed that apparently he was not considering himself as a possible host. Minato looked at her from the corner of his eye. You attacked him yesterday, if you recall. The latest report stated that he still hasn't woken up from the genjutsu you put him under. Her mood instantly lightened. The jerk deserved it. In fact, he literally asked for it. She settled her hands in her lap and grinned. That will show him to try and take control of people. Minato sighed. We'll have to deal with the fallout today. Yesterday the village and the Uchihas came to an agreement and we've started mediation on their concerns. But they will most likely want you to come back to their part of the village. Oh, now they want me to stay with them. The kitsune grumped, just when she had gotten to bunk with her 2 favorite humans. And learned that one of them would walk around mostly naked if roused suddenly. She purred a bit at the thought. Well, now you're an Uchiha. I was always an Uchiha. She snapped, snatching the plate from the shadow clone so abruptly that it dispelled. The other set a plate in front of Minato and then vanished while the real Naruto sat down and took a bite of his own sweet toast. Of this I am aware, Minato said mildly, and the irony is not lost on me. What's irony mean? Naruto asked around a mouthful of toast. Don't talk with your mouth full. Minato chided. Irony means stupidity, in this case, brat. The kitsune snarked, before savagely tearing into her own toast. So after breakfast, you should probably clean up a bit. Minato continued. Are you going to help me with that? She asked slyly. Minato choked on his toast. I'll help you, Naruto offered. No, absolutely not. Minato dropped the toast and took a drink of tea to settle his throat. Oh, are you jealous? The kitsune asked, slinking back in her chair and looking at him smugly. You know perfectly well how to clean yourself, Minato said shortly. Breakfast was over fairly quickly, and Masumi was shown where the bathing area was. She did in fact know the basics of cleaning up, but it was also true that she wasn't loath to accept help. Especially with the long pelt springing from the top of her head. She felt that she should keep as much of it as possible as the rest of her body was so bald, but it was really hard to keep from tangling into a huge mat that stank to high heavens. And it seemed to enjoy sticking straight up in the back, despite its length. She blamed the inbreeding for that. So it was without shame that once she was washed and dressed in new clothes that Minato had left for her, she sought him out. He looked up from a stack of papers and put down his cup of tea. Are you ready? Mostly, she replied. Now that she was standing in front of him, the request seemed stupid. Like she were a dog, not a fox, and she was asking her master to rub her tummy. What is it? He asked. Nothing. She shook her head and backed away. Minato set the papers aside and stood up, coming over to her. What's wrong? You like Taiyaki and Yoruichi, right? I'm sure they'll take you in now that Fugaku has been overruled and put in a coma. She frowned. Why does anyone have to take me in? Am I some orphan child? No, Minato said, leaning back in surprise. You are definitely not a child. She looked at him, studying his expression. I could live on my own, couldn't I? I'm sure there's something in this town I could do. She studied her hands and the restrictive human chakra coils that prevented her from being useful by demolishing things, as her essential nature demanded. Maybe I could do sculpture or something. she muttered in disgust. She almost jumped when a hand landed softly on her shoulder. She turned to Minato, uncertain. Nothing seemed right anymore. She didn't even know what she was still doing here. Whatever you want to do, we'll figure it out, alright? Minato asked gently, rubbing her shoulder comfortingly. The kitsune looked down at the floor and sighed. Things used to be so simple. Destroy everything in sight, chat with other demons, answer summons, destroy more things, including the summoner if possible. Take a nap for a few centuries. Minato's other hand came under her chin and lifted it gently, until they were looking in each other's eyes. It will all work out, he promised. Alright, she whispered. What were you going to ask me? He murmured, running his hand along her jaw, tracing behind her ear before he let both his hands drop slowly. The kitsune wanted to grab his hands and put them back, but was disgusted with herself for the thought. She felt one side of her mouth quirk. Was wondering if you would help me with my hair? Her nose twitched and she scratched at it. Alright, Masumi looked up at him, startled. He would? Where's the brush? She handed it to him and he gestured for her to sit down on the couch. He sat behind her and she waited for the pain to come. But he was working quite gently at the ends and working his way to the top. Why are you doing that? She asked, twisting around a bit to see, though she was pushed back to face forward immediately. Doing what? Minato asked, continuing the steady rhythm. Brushing it like that, she clarified. It works better to start at the ends with long hair. Is that so? She mused. It certainly seemed to be, but maybe he was just playing with the ends of her hair and it only seemed he was brushing it. Ouch, she snapped, trying to twist around again. Sorry. He pushed her back straight. Yes, it does. I had long hair for a while and Kush. He trailed off. She could hear him swallow. Kushina had long hair. He finished the statement but didn't say anything more. Dad, Naruto called as he bounced into the room. I'm off to the academy. Do well today. Graduation is tomorrow, isn't it? Yup. And this year I'll pass for sure, since I know the super awesome Kage Bushin. I will blow them away. It's much better than the regular Bushin, right Dad? That it is. Have fun and be safe. Minato replied, laughing. Heh. I know the Anbu-san will be watching me the whole time, Dad. How could I get into trouble? The kid grinned widely. You always seem to manage. Minato said dryly. Yeah, have fun yelling at the old farts. Naruto called as she slammed the door on the way out. We should get going soon. Minato commented. He finished the last big snag in the impressively long and previously impressively tangled mane. He swept the brush along the scalp of the woman in front of him and heard her gasp. He hadn't felt a snag, but he was about to ask if he had hurt her when she started to purr. He brushed along her scalp again and watched her arch into it. He hastily set the brush down and stood up. There you go, all the knots are taken care of. Masumi turned to him lazily, eyes half-lidded. Can we do that every morning? She sighed. Minato gulped, though for some reason the question had him almost reflexively answering, yes. It wasn't like she hadn't been a nearly constant presence in his life for the past 2 years. Mostly when he was scolding her about a prank, right? Buying her ramen was a bribe to stop the pranks, especially when he caught her plotting with his son, nothing more. Bringing her home with him was a necessity. He grumbled to himself and rubbed his forehead. We need to get going. The council will be meeting soon. Minato said decisively, moving towards the stairs. I need to get into my official clothing. I'll be back down in a bit and then we can go, alright? He beat a hasty retreat without waiting for an answer. The kitsune pulled some of the long black hair in front of her shoulder and ran her fingers through it. They met no resistance. She sighed and flung it back behind her. She had thrown away her pride as a fox, a wild creature and a force of nature, and acted like some domesticated bitch. Her reward was having Minato pet her like one. It sort of seemed worth it. She scoffed at herself and stood. Pathetic. Minato had to move the meeting outside as a good half of the Uchiha clan as well as large numbers of other highly placed clans members and assorted civilians had come. Since all the basics of a peace agreement had been hammered out yesterday, and since technically all meetings of the council could be attended by the general public. As much as this was going to be a disaster, neither Minato nor the council members could do anything about it. Show us. No. Masumi cut off the Hyuga. But, no. She growled at the Uchiha. Everyone, please wait for the meeting to ask your questions. Minato said, steering Masumi away from the crowd of ninja and civilians before something exploded. And, looking at the woman's twitching face, it would probably be the prankster and everyone that happened to be around her. "Relax," he murmured in her ear. She looked up at him with wide eyes. He counted it as a win, as she was no longer snarling. Minato sat her down and then settled beside her. "All right everyone," he called out, causing most of the talking to die down. "We're here to settle some issues that have come from the recent misunderstanding between the Uchiha clan and this council." Misunderstanding, someone shouted, and it was chaos again. Minato rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Yes, misunderstanding," Minato called out. "Anyone who continues to disrupt this meeting will be taken away by the Anbu or the Konoha police. Whichever force looks more bloodthirsty." Everyone mostly quieted down. There have been some issues, but the principal players have been arrested and will be tried for treason. The remaining parties have come to agreements which will most likely not impact anything in daily life. Minato nodded to acknowledge Uchiha Hachikasu, the acting head of the clan, indicating that the temporary leader had the floor. "We would like to apologize for the previous clan head's hostility toward Masumi." Hachikasu started. Masumi cocked her head to the side but didn't acknowledge the speaker, and more than that. "It is the hope of the clan that she will live with one of the Uchiha that have volunteered for the honor of hosting her in their home." Minato noted Masumi's nose twitching and started to get a bit nervous. That seemed to be a gesture that precluded snarling. Several Uchiha stepped up with the interim leader. It was glaringly obvious that all of them were unattached males of marrying age, all of whom had activated Sharingans. All but one were on the Konoha police force. It was somewhat conspicuous that Itachi was absent. The Hokage hoped that Masumi wouldn't pick up on the unsubtle tactic. "What is this, a lineup of mates?" Masumi snapped. Minato sighed. It was a vain hope, as he had expected. She might be oblivious most of the time, but a maneuver of such blatancy wasn't going to get past even the most politically ignorant child in the academy. "These young men have all volunteered." Hachikasu started. "You want me to mate with these kits? Do you take me for a cradle robber of some sort?" Hachikasu looked confused, and rightly so. It was unusual for a woman to protest someone thinking she was younger than she was. But also, Masumi looked perhaps mid-20s at the oldest. The average age of the Uchiha men looked considerably older than that. Though, Minato considered, she had been in the village for the past, he blinked. For almost 6 years now. And she had always looked to be mid-20s. He'd have to compare with her intake photo, to see if there had been any aging changes or not. Hachikasu made placating motions. "We felt that it would be helpful for you to have a selection of young men who find you attractive." Minato looked over to the woman beside him and saw that the flattery had gotten Hachikasu absolutely nowhere. In fact, she looked more annoyed. "And with these fine Uchiha, all of your children will have the capability to activate their Sharingan." A crash made Minato jump a little bit, not because he had been surprised to hear it, but more because of the sharply increasing sense of impending disaster. "You wish me to serve as a brood mare for a clan that has rejected me?" Masumi's aura seemed to be turning a bit red around the edges. Very few women are able to activate their Sharingan, and those who do have all their children able to do so. We have few girls in the clan as they rarely survive to adulthood. And no one, of course, has it to the level. Hachikasu tried to continue. "You not only want to use me as a brood mare, but as one for the despicable man." Minato clapped a hand over her mouth, receiving a deadly glare in response. Made even more deadly by the 3 black commas spinning in each red eye. "It's activated," Minato told her softly, and watched those red eyes widen and then fade back to black. He let her go. Masumi took a deep, shuddering breath before turning back to Hachikasu. "No," she replied, before sitting back down. "But, you need to come back to the clan. Is there someone else that you would prefer to live with?" Hachikasu asked hopefully. "I owe nothing to the clan. One of your number has." She trailed off. Minato winced at the reference to Uchiha Madara. "But I didn't blame you for that. Much." She paused again. "But since that time only 3 of your number has been anything but hostile." She waved a hand airily. "I suppose I could stay with Itachi. Doesn't he still live in Fugaku's house? I feel that taking over the family would be an appropriate battle trophy." Her grin was wide and stretched almost ear to ear. Minato felt that the idea was an awful one, and not just because she had just essentially killed the head of the household. Hachikasu turned a bit pale, and the other Uchiha were looking restless. "Itachi and the rest of his family are under review, They aren't really available to host such a valuable person. Masumi grasped the armrests of the chair so tightly that they creaked and started to crack. Impressive considering that she was not a ninja, and the chairs were reinforced with the strength of one in mind. Then I have no desire to return to your clan, she said through gritted teeth. But you didn't even say if you activated the Mangekyo Sharingan the same way. Hachikasu burst out. Minato hoped that she would cooperate and coach the Uchiha, as the promise of the technique was part of the reason that they were not in open civil war now. You want to match me up with some young kid and spill clan secrets into a general meeting? Masumi sneered at the man. No, of course not right now. You don't need to choose a host, either, of course, these are clan matters. Hachikasu babbled. Minato felt a bit sorry for the man. He was the only one the clan could agree on, but he wasn't particularly politically savvy. Or really, even remotely politically savvy. No, no, Masumi waved magnanimously. If you wish to be so generous as to make all of your clan's actions completely transparent, I shall have to oblige you. Hachikasu looked rather ill. As all Uchiha are aware, the only documented way to activate one's, she slid a look to Minato before she continued. Manki eyes is to become very close friends with someone, love them in the deepest part of your heart, and then brutally murder them. Everyone gasped, the non-Uchiha at the revelation, and the Uchiha that she had actually said it. Minato felt as ill as Hachikasu looked. He knew there was something horrific involved, but killing your best friend? The picture of what had been done to the woman at the hands of Madara had been bleak before, but now he realized that on top of completely controlling his own daughter, he must have also emotionally tortured her. It was a wonder she was functional at all. Oh, but that's not the end of course. Masumi sneered. That will only get you the first level. If you stay with that you will eventually go blind, and every time you use your new technique, your eyes will bleed. In order to counteract that, you have to kill your own sibling and steal their eyes, which have to, of course, be at the same level. At this pronouncement there was complete silence. Minato looked over at Masumi, but her face was a blank mask. His heart contracted painfully. Madara hadn't done this to only one child, but two? And that was assuming that he had gotten the process correct on the first try. What a monster. You want this technique? This thing that controls people, takes away their will, traps them in a prison of their own minds making? She continued quietly. Maybe it would have been better, then, if you had all been murdered. Minato winced, both because that was supposed to be a state secret, but more because of the pain in her voice. I'm a fool, she whispered, so quietly that only Minato could hear her. What am I doing here, connecting? They're all the same. Minato sucked in his breath to say something, but she stood up and walked toward the assembled Uchiha. Anyone who tries to get the Manki eyes I will kill them. She said it flatly, with no emotion. Turning to Hachikasu she snarled. And I don't need a keeper. And with that she disappeared in a flash of red. Minato blinked. That hadn't looked like a body flicker, that had looked like his own yellow flash technique. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Minato stood, trying to rein in the frantic whispers that had broken out after Masumi's disappearance. He swept his vision over the gathered people. A good percentage of the Uchiha looked angry or scared. These were probably the ones for whom Masumi's speech had not been news. Some of the Uchiha and all of the villagers looked disgusted. He had a feeling that if anyone now appeared with the Mangekyo Sharingan, that person would be hunted by not just the broken Uchiha woman, but also most of the rest of the clans, if not the whole village.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.